Before we begin, there's something you need to understand. Some stories stay buried for a reason. The ones you're about to hear tonight weren't meant to be shared publicly. They come from real people, real moments, and real fear. To protect those involved, identities have been kept confidential, and certain details have been altered. What hasn't been changed is the experience itself. If true stories like these keep you watching, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps this channel continue telling stories that are rarely spoken about. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. I've driven the Blue Ridge Parkway maybe a dozen times. It's one of those roads that makes you feel small in a good way. Miles and miles of mountains and trees and sky. And if you time it right in the fall, the colors are unbelievable. I've always gone alone. I like the quiet. I like being able to stop whenever I want, take pictures, sit on an overlook and just breathe for a while. This trip was in late October. I'd taken a week off work and planned to drive the whole parkway from end to end, camping at different spots along the way. I had my gear in the back, plenty of food, water, a good sleeping bag. I'm usually pretty careful about preparation. I keep my truck maintained, I bring extra supplies, and I always make sure I have enough gas to get between towns. Except this time I screwed up. I'd stopped at an overlook around midday to eat lunch and take some photos. I was sitting on a stone wall looking out over the valley, and I completely lost track of time. By the time I got back in the truck, it was almost 4 in the afternoon, and I realized I'd missed the last town with a gas station. My gauge was sitting just above a quarter tank. Normally that would be fine. I could make it to the next town easy, but I'd forgotten that this particular stretch of the parkway was longer than I thought. No towns, no services, just road. I kept driving because I didn't have much choice. The sun was starting to drop behind the mountains, and the temperature was falling fast. I watched the gas gauge drop lower and lower. By the time it hit the red, I was starting to panic. There was nothing around me, just trees and curves and the occasional pull-off for scenic views. No cars, no people, nothing. Then I saw it, a gas station. It was set back from the road, almost hidden by trees. The building was old, like really old. Faded white paint peeling off the walls, a rusted metal roof, and 2 ancient pumps out front that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 70s. There was a dim light on inside, and a crooked sign that just said gas in hand-painted letters. I almost kept driving. Something about the place felt wrong immediately. It looked abandoned, even though the light was on. But my truck was running on fumes. I didn't have a choice. I pulled in and parked next to one of the pumps. The whole area was gravel and weeds. There were no other cars, no sounds except the wind moving through the trees. I sat there for a second, just looking around. The windows of the building were dirty and covered with some kind of film. I couldn't see inside. I got out and tried the pump. It didn't work, no power. I pressed the buttons and nothing happened. I looked toward the building and saw a handwritten sign taped to the door that said pay inside. I really didn't want to go inside. Every instinct I had was telling me to get back in the truck and coast as far as I could on whatever gas was left. But I thought about being stranded out here in the dark, with no phone signal and no way to call for help. So I walked to the door. The inside was worse than the outside. It smelled like mildew and something else I couldn't place. Something sour. There were a few shelves with old dusty cans and boxes on them, a cooler in the corner that was either broken or turned off, and a counter at the back with a register that looked like it belonged in a museum. There was a man behind the counter, maybe mid-50s, wearing a stained flannel shirt and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look up when I came in, just kept staring down at something I couldn't see. I said hello. He lifted his head slowly and looked at me. His face was blank. No smile, no greeting, just staring. I told him I needed gas. He nodded once and said the pumps didn't work automatically. He'd have to turn them on from inside. He said it would be $40, cash only. I didn't like the way he said it. Not rude exactly, but flat, like he was reading from a script. I pulled out my wallet and handed him 2 20s. He took the bills and didn't give me change, just turned and flipped a switch on the wall behind him. I walked back outside and started pumping. The pump was slow, really slow. I stood there watching the numbers tick up and looking around. That's when I noticed another man standing near the edge of the building. He wasn't there before, I'm sure of it. He was younger, maybe 30s, wearing a canvas jacket and jeans. He was smoking a cigarette and watching me. Not looking away when I made eye contact, just watching. I tried to ignore him and kept my eyes on the pump. The numbers were moving so slowly, I thought it might take 10 minutes, just to fill half the tank. My heart was pounding. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stop the pump and just drive away, but I needed the gas. The younger guy started walking toward me, casual, slow, like he was just stretching his legs. He stopped about 10 feet away and asked where I was headed. I lied and said I was meeting friends in Asheville. He nodded and took another drag from his cigarette. Then he asked if I was alone. I said no. I said my friends were waiting for me down the road. Another lie. He smiled, not a friendly smile. He said it was a long stretch of road and not many people came through here anymore. He said it wasn't safe to travel alone. The pump clicked off. I yanked the nozzle out and shoved it back onto the hook. I didn't screw my gas cap on tight. I just threw it on and started walking to the driver's side door. The younger guy moved between me and the truck. He didn't touch me. He just stood there blocking my path. He said I seemed nervous. He asked if something was wrong. I told him to move. My voice came out louder than I expected. He didn't move. He just kept smiling. That's when the older man came out of the building. He walked down the steps and stood next to the younger guy. They didn't say anything. They just stood there side by side, watching me. I thought about running. I thought about screaming. But there was no one around to hear. I was alone with two men in the middle of nowhere, and they knew it. Then the older man said I should check my tire. He pointed to the front passenger side and said it looked low. I didn't look. I told him it was fine. He shook his head and said I really should check it, that it might not make it down the mountain. I don't know what made me look, but I did. I walked around the front of the truck and he was right. The tire looked low, really low, almost flat. My stomach dropped. That tire was fine when I pulled in. I knew it was. I looked back at the two men. They hadn't moved. They were just standing there, watching, waiting. I got in the truck and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I started the engine and threw it into reverse. The younger guy shouted something, but I didn't hear what. I just drove. I pulled back onto the parkway and accelerated. The tire was definitely flat. I could feel it thumping with every rotation. But I kept going. I wasn't stopping. Not there. Not anywhere near there. About 2 miles down the road, I came around a curve and slammed on the brakes. There was a car blocking the road. An old sedan parked sideways across both lanes. No lights, no hazards. Just sitting there. I sat there staring at it for maybe 5 seconds. Then I realized this was the trap. They'd let the air out of my tire so I'd have to stop. And they'd blocked the road so I couldn't get past. I looked in the rearview mirror. Headlights, coming fast. I didn't think. I just turned the wheel hard to the right and drove off the pavement. The truck bounced and lurched over rocks and roots. Branches scraped the sides. The flat tire was shredding itself. But I kept going. I drove through the woods parallel to the road for maybe a quarter mile until I found another place to get back on the pavement. I drove on that ruined tire for another 15 miles until I reached a real town with lights and people and a police station. I told them what happened. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I don't think they believed me. They didn't find anything. I had the tire replaced and drove home the next day. I didn't camp. I didn't stop except for gas in busy stations with cameras and crowds. I think about what would have happened if I'd stopped to change that tire. If I'd gotten out of the truck on that empty road with those men coming up behind me. I keep extra fuel in the truck now. I don't care how much it weighs or how much space it takes up. I'll never let myself be that vulnerable again. We were just trying to get away for a weekend. Nothing fancy. Just me, Sarah, Mark, and Ben driving down to West Virginia to hike some trails we'd been hearing about since freshman year. We were all seniors now, and this felt like one of those last chances to do something together before real life kicked in. The weather forecast wasn't great, but we figured we could handle a little rain. We got to the trailhead around 9 in the morning. It was cloudy but dry, and the parking lot was nearly empty. Just our beat-up Honda and one other car, a dark blue pickup truck that looked like it had seen better days. We started hiking, and honestly, everything felt fine at first. The trail was beautiful. Thick trees, that earthy smell after it rains, birds calling to each other. Sarah was taking pictures every 5 minutes, and Mark kept complaining about his new boots, even though we told him 100 times to break them in first. It was normal. It was good. About an hour in, we saw him for the first time. Just a guy standing off to the side of the trail, maybe 20 yards ahead. He wasn't doing anything. Not looking at a map, not drinking water, not taking a picture. Just standing there, facing us. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a faded green jacket and jeans. His hair was greasy, and even from that distance, something about him felt off. Ben waved at him, trying to be friendly. The guy didn't wave back. He just watched us as we walked past. Sarah grabbed my arm and whispered that it was weird. But I told her people are strange sometimes. Hikers are quirky. Maybe he was birdwatching or something. I didn't actually believe that, but I said it anyway because I didn't want to admit that my stomach had tightened the second I saw him. We kept going. About 30 minutes later, we stopped to drink some water and eat granola bars. That's when Ben pointed back down the trail. The guy was there again. Not close, but visible. just standing in the middle of the path, watching us. Mark laughed it off. He said maybe the guy was just slow and we kept leapfrogging each other on the trail. But Sarah wasn't laughing. She said we should turn around. I remember feeling annoyed at that suggestion, because we'd driven 4 hours to get here, and turning around felt like admitting something was actually wrong. So I suggested we just take a different loop trail that branched off to the left. Everyone agreed. We thought that would solve it, except it didn't. We hiked the loop for another hour, and just as we were coming back toward where we'd parked, we saw him again. This time he was closer, maybe 10 yards away, and this time he smiled. Not a friendly smile. It was slow and deliberate, like he wanted us to know he'd been following us the whole time. That's when we started moving fast. Nobody said anything. We just picked up the pace and headed straight back to the parking lot. The sky had gotten darker, and I could feel the first drops of rain starting to fall. By the time we reached the car, it was coming down hard. We all climbed in and locked the doors. I was driving, and I started the engine immediately. But then Ben said we should wait a few minutes for the rain to let up, because the roads were going to be slick and visibility was already terrible. He wasn't wrong. The rain was so heavy I could barely see 10 feet ahead. So I turned off the engine, and we sat there. Sarah kept looking out the back window. Mark was trying to make jokes, but his voice was shaky. I just stared at the rain and tried to convince myself that the guy was gone, that he'd gotten in his truck and left, that we were being paranoid. We waited maybe 20 minutes. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and I turned the key again. That's when we heard the knock on the window. All 4 of us jumped. I turned my head, and there he was, standing right next to the driver's side door. His face was inches from the glass. Rain dripped off his hair and his jacket. His eyes were wide, and he was still smiling. He didn't say anything. He just tapped the glass again with his knuckle. Slow, deliberate. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun in the mud for a second before catching, and we lurched backward. He stepped away from the car but didn't run. He just stood there watching us as I spun the wheel and tore out of the parking lot. We thought that was it. We thought we'd gotten away. We drove for maybe 10 minutes, nobody speaking, just the sound of the windshield wipers and our breathing. Then Sarah said we should pull over somewhere public and call the police. I agreed, but we were in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no gas stations, just winding mountain roads and trees. Then the car started making a noise, a grinding, rattling noise from under the hood. I pulled over onto a gravel shoulder and we all got out to look. I'm not a car guy, but even I could see the problem. Something was leaking. Fluid was dripping onto the ground and the engine was hissing. Mark said we must have damaged something when we peeled out of the parking lot. Ben was already trying to call someone, but there was still no signal. I looked up and down the road. Nothing. No headlights, no houses, just rain and fog and trees. We decided to get back in the car and wait. Maybe a park ranger would drive by. Maybe the cell service would come back. Maybe the rain would stop and we could at least see where we were. We waited in silence. Sarah was crying quietly in the back seat. Ben kept checking his phone. Mark was breathing hard, staring out the window. I had my hands on the steering wheel even though the engine was off. I don't know why. It just felt like I needed to hold on to something. That's when I saw the headlights in the rearview mirror. A truck was coming up behind us slowly. My first thought was relief. Someone was here. We could ask for help. But then the truck stopped about 50 feet back. Just sat there. Engine running, headlights on. Ben said maybe it was someone checking if we needed help. He started to open his door. That's when the driver's side door of the truck opened and the man stepped out. It was him. I locked the doors again and told everyone to stay inside. He started walking toward us, slow, not rushed, like he had all the time in the world. Sarah was screaming. Ben was yelling at me to drive, but the car wouldn't start. I turned the key over and over, and the engine just clicked and whined. The man reached the car and tried the back door handle. When it didn't open, he moved to the front passenger side. Then he just stood there for a second, looking at us through the window. Then he picked up a rock. The glass shattered on the first hit. Ben threw his arms up, and the man reached in and grabbed him by the shirt. I don't remember deciding to move. I just did. I threw open my door and ran around the car. Mark was right behind me. We pulled the guy off Ben, and he turned on us. He was strong. Stronger than he looked. He shoved Mark backward into the ditch, and Mark screamed. Then the guy swung at me. I ducked and tackled him. We hit the gravel hard. I don't know how long we fought. It felt like forever. He was hitting me, and I was hitting him. And I could hear Ben yelling and Sarah screaming. Then Mark got back up. His leg was twisted wrong, but he grabbed a piece of broken glass from the ground and slashed at the guy's arm. The man howled and stumbled backward. That gave us just enough time. Ben and I dragged Mark back to the car, and somehow, I don't know how, the engine turned over. We drove with the passenger window smashed and Mark bleeding in the back seat until We found a ranger station 12 miles down the road. Mark needed surgery, 17 stitches in his side and a broken ankle. The police found the guy's truck abandoned 2 days later, but they never found him. We should have left the second we saw him the first time. That's what I think about now. We felt it, all of us, but we didn't listen. My name is Garrett, and I'm a data analyst living in a converted textile mill in Lowell, Massachusetts. I moved into Unit 304 last September. Affordable rent, exposed brick, the kind of place that looks great on Instagram. I lived alone, worked from home 3 days a week, and mostly kept to myself. The apartment directly above me, 404, had been empty since I moved in. The landlord mentioned something about renovations, but I never saw anyone working up there. I didn't care. The silence was perfect. That changed on a Tuesday in late October. I was finishing up a report around 11 p.m. when I heard it. Footsteps. Not loud, but deliberate. Heel toe, crossing the room above me in a slow, measured pace. I glanced at my ceiling and waited. The steps continued, traced the same path, then stopped directly above my desk. I texted my landlord. "Someone moving into 404? His response came 5 minutes later. "No, still vacant." Why? I stared at that message longer than I should have. Then I heard the steps again. Same route, same rhythm. I convinced myself it was pipes, or the building settling. Old mill buildings make noise. I went to bed. The next night, the walking started at 11 p.m. exactly. Same pattern. I timed it. 6 steps forward, pause, 6 steps back. Over and over for 20 minutes, then silence. I called the landlord the next morning, told him someone was definitely up there. He seemed annoyed but agreed to check. He called me back an hour later. "I went up there, Garrett. Doors still padlocked from the outside. No one's been in that unit for 8 months. The dust on the floor is undisturbed." "That's impossible," I said. "I hear someone walking every night." "Maybe it's coming from a different unit," he suggested. "Sound travels weird in these old buildings." But I knew what I heard, and I knew it came from directly above me. That night, I recorded it. I set my phone on the coffee table, hit record, and waited. At 11 p.m., the footsteps began. I stood on my couch, pressing my ear to the ceiling, and listened. 6 steps forward, pause, 6 steps back. The ceiling was cold against my skin, and I swear I could feel vibrations with each step. I played the recording back. It captured everything. The distinct sound of footsteps on hardwood, the pauses, even a faint creaking sound I hadn't noticed in real time. I sent the audio file to my landlord with a message. "This is from 404. Tonight. Explain this." He never responded. The pattern continued for a week. Every night at 11 p.m. I started dreading it, watching the clock, my stomach tightening as the hour approached. I'd sit in the dark, listening, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. On the 8th night, the footsteps stopped in a different spot, right above my bedroom. Then I heard something new, a dragging sound, like furniture being moved. Slow, scraping across the floor. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. My heart was hammering. I grabbed my phone and pulled up a neighbor's number. Someone, anyone. But I didn't call. What would I say? The dragging sound came again. Then a thump. Not loud, heavy, like something falling over. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. At dawn, I made a decision. I had to see inside that apartment. I found the landlord's master key code taped inside the fuse box. A note he'd left when I moved in. In case of emergency. This qualified. I went upstairs at noon when the sunlight poured through the hallway windows. The padlock on 404's door was coated in rust. I entered the code. It clicked open. The door swung inward with a slow creak. The apartment was empty, completely bare. No furniture, no belongings, nothing. Just scarred hardwood floors and blank walls. The air was stale, suffocating. I walked to the center of the unit, standing in what I estimated was directly above my desk. The floor was covered in dust, just like the landlord said, except for one area. A path, swept clean, tracing a line across the room. 6 steps forward, 6 steps back. Over and over, the pattern worn into the dust like someone had walked it 1,000 times. My throat went dry. I followed the path to where it ended, above my bedroom. There, in the dust, was a rectangular outline, like something had been placed there, then removed. The shape was about 6 feet long, 2 feet wide. I left the apartment and locked it behind me. My hands shook as I put the padlock back in place. That night, the footsteps didn't come at 11 p.m. I sat in the silence, almost relieved, thinking maybe it was over. Then, at 11:47 p.m., I heard them. But this time, they weren't coming from above. They were coming from inside my apartment, heel toe, moving through my bedroom, down the hallway, stopping just outside my living room door. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The footsteps waited there, just beyond the doorway, for what felt like an eternity. Then they walked away, back down the hallway, into the bedroom. Silence. I spent that night in my car in the parking lot. The next morning, I gave my 30-day notice. My landlord didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said he'd start showing the unit next month. I moved out 3 weeks later. As I loaded the last box into my car, I saw someone standing in the window of Unit 404. Just a silhouette, motionless, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I live in Worcester now, a different building entirely. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear them. 6 steps forward, 6 steps back. And I know eventually they'll find where I am now. Because 2 weeks ago, I got a package, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a Polaroid, yellowed and old. It showed the inside of Unit 404, the empty room, the dusty floor. And in the center of the frame, lying in that rectangular outline, was a body. I don't know whose face it was supposed to be. The photo was too degraded, too faded. But the posture was unmistakable. Arms at the sides, legs straight, perfectly still. The timestamp printed on the bottom read, October 23rd, 2 days before I first heard the footsteps. I keep the photo in a drawer now. I don't know why. Maybe because throwing it away feels worse than keeping it. Sometimes I take it out and stare at it, trying to convince myself it's a prank, a sick joke. But deep down, I know better. And every night at 11 p.m., I sit in the dark and wait, listening for the sound of footsteps that are always, inevitably, getting closer. My name is David Chen, and I'm a real estate developer from Portland, Oregon. What happened to me last September still keeps me up at night, and I need to tell someone about it, even if nobody believes me. I was overseeing the clearing of a 40-acre plot in the Cascade foothills, about 2 hours east of the city. Beautiful land, old-growth forest, mostly Douglas fir and western red cedar, the kind of trees that had been standing there for maybe 200 years. We'd gotten all the permits, jumped through all the environmental hoops. Everything was legal. We were going to build a luxury housing development called Cascade Vista Estates. The logging crew started work on a Monday morning. I remember standing there with my coffee, watching the first tree come down. It was massive, probably 150 feet tall, trunk as wide as a car. When it fell, the sound echoed through the whole valley. I felt it in my chest. By Wednesday, we'd cleared about 5 acres. That's when things started feeling off. The foreman, a guy named Rick who'd been doing this for 30 years, came to me around noon. "Mr. Chen, the guys are spooked," he said. "They keep hearing things in the trees, sounds like, I don't know. Screaming maybe, but not human." I told him it was probably just animals relocating, stressed by the noise. Elk, maybe coyotes. He didn't look convinced, but he went back to work. That night, I stayed late in my trailer on site, going over the next day's plans. Around 11 p.m., I heard it myself. It started as a low sound, almost like wind, but there wasn't any wind. Then it rose in pitch, this awful wailing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The trees around my trailer creaked and swayed, even though the air was perfectly still. I stepped outside with my flashlight. The cleared area looked wrong in the darkness. The stumps, dozens of them, seemed to be weeping. I walked closer and touched one. Sap, thick and dark, was oozing out, way more than should be possible. And it was warm. "Just the wood settling," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. Thursday morning, 2 of the crew didn't show up. "No calls, no explanations," Rick said. "They'd probably just quit." But I could see the worry in his eyes. The remaining crew worked slowly, nervously. One of the chainsaw operators, a young guy named Tommy, kept stopping and looking over his shoulder. "You okay?" I asked him during a break. "The trees are watching us," he said quietly. I know how that sounds, but I swear to God, they're watching. I should have shut it down then. I should have listened to that instinct screaming at me to leave. But we had investors, deadlines, contracts. So I told Tommy to take the rest of the day off and get some sleep. Friday was when it all fell apart. We started work at dawn. I was standing near the tree line, marking the next section to be cleared, when I noticed something strange. The trees at the edge of the clearing had moved. I know that sounds insane, but I'd been staring at this forest for days, and I knew the layout. A cluster of young cedars that had been about 20 feet back from the clearing edge was now right at the boundary. Their roots were exposed, lifted partially out of the ground, like they'd dragged themselves forward during the night. "Rick," I called out, "come look at this." Before he could respond, we heard Tommy scream. He was near the center of the cleared area, surrounded by stumps. His chainsaw was on the ground, still running. He was trying to run toward us, but he couldn't move. His boots were stuck in something. As we got closer, I saw it. Roots. Thin roots had burst up through the soil and wrapped around his ankles, and they were pulling him down. "Help me!" Tommy was crying, yanking at his legs. "Help me, please!" Rick and I grabbed him under the arms and pulled. The roots tightened, and I heard Tommy's ankles crack. He screamed again. More roots erupted from the ground, wrapping around his calves, his thighs. They were pulling him down into the earth itself. The other crew members ran over with axes and started hacking at the roots. Black sap sprayed everywhere. The roots writhed like living things, like snakes. For every one we cut, 2 more burst from the ground. Tommy was waist deep now, still screaming, his fingers clawing at the dirt. "Pull him out!" I was yelling, my hands slipping on his shirt, his skin. "Pull him out!" But we couldn't. The earth swallowed him. His screams became muffled, then stopped. In less than 2 minutes, Tommy was gone. Just gone. The ground where he'd been standing smoothed over like water, leaving only his hard hat. We ran. All of us. We ran to our vehicles and drove away, and I've never driven faster in my life. Behind us, I could hear it. That wailing sound, but louder now, triumphant almost. And the trees. In my rearview mirror, I swear I saw them, moving, spreading back into the cleared area, reclaiming what we'd taken. The police searched for 3 days. They found nothing. No body, no disturbance in the soil. They ruled it a missing person case. The lumber company's insurance investigators concluded that Tommy had probably run off, maybe had a breakdown. The project was abandoned. The investors pulled out. I went back once, alone, about a month later. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it for myself, to confirm I wasn't crazy. The clearing was gone. Completely gone. Young trees, already 20 feet tall, covered every inch of the 5 acres we'd spent days clearing, saplings that should have taken years to grow. The stumps were nowhere to be seen, swallowed by the forest floor. And in the center, where Tommy had been taken, there was a tree I'd never seen before. A massive cedar, easily 200 years old, that couldn't possibly have grown there in a month. I walked up to it, my heart hammering, and put my hand on the bark. It was warm, and deep inside the trunk I heard it. A sound like breathing, and then very faintly, a voice. Tommy's voice. "It hurts," it whispered from inside the tree. "Please, it hurts so much." I ran. I haven't been back. I sold my company, moved to Seattle, and now I work in an office building where I can't see trees from any window. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that wailing sound, and I know, that the forest remembers what we tried to do. The permits for Cascade Vista Estates are still on file. Sometimes I get calls from developers asking about the land, saying they heard it's available. I tell them all the same thing. Don't go there. Don't clear those trees. Don't make the same mistake I did. Some of them laugh. Some of them hang up. I wonder how long before I hear about them on the news. I'm Amanda Reeves, and I used to be a beekeeper in Savannah, Georgia. Notice I said used to be. I'll never keep bees again. I'll never even go near honey. What I'm about to tell you is the God's honest truth, and I still have the scars to prove it. It started in April of last year. I had about 30 hives on my property, a small farm about 15 miles outside the city. I'd been keeping bees for almost 10 years. It was peaceful work, meditative almost. I loved the sound of them, the way they moved together like a single organism. My honey won awards at the county fair 3 years running. That spring, a biotech company called Verdant Solutions bought the property next to mine. They were developing some kind of pesticide, they said. Something revolutionary that would only target invasive species and leave native insects alone. They assured everyone in the area it was completely safe. They even had EPA approval. The facility went up fast, a sprawling complex of laboratories and greenhouses. By mid-April, they were operational. That's when my bees started acting strange. At first, it was subtle. They seemed more aggressive, buzzing louder than usual. When I opened the hives for inspection, they'd swarm around me more frantically, even though I was wearing my suit. But they were still producing honey, still following their usual patterns, so I didn't worry too much. Then the honey started changing. In late May, I extracted a batch and noticed it was darker than normal, almost amber with a slightly metallic smell. I tasted a tiny bit, just a drop, and immediately spit it out. It was bitter, chemical tasting. Wrong. I called the county agriculture extension office, and they sent someone out to test it. The results came back inconclusive. Possible chemical contamination from an unknown source, the report said. They recommended I dump that batch and monitor the next one. I went to Verdant Solutions to ask about their pesticide. The facility manager, a woman named Dr. Patricia Hammond, was polite but dismissive. Our product is completely safe for pollinators, she said. We've done extensive testing. Whatever's affecting your bees, it's not coming from us. But I knew better. My property had been pristine for a decade. Nothing had changed except Verdant Solutions. In June, things got worse. I started finding dead bees. Hundreds of them at first, then thousands. They'd pile up at the entrance to the hives, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions. But here's the thing. They weren't dying from pesticide poisoning. When I looked closer, I saw that they were killing each other. The ground was littered with torn-off wings, separated abdomens, severed legs. It was a massacre. The surviving bees had changed. When I approached a hive, they'd go silent. Completely silent. Thousands of bees making no sound at all, just watching me through the mesh of my veil. Their movements became synchronized in a way I'd never seen before, like they were being controlled by a single intelligence. One evening in late June, I made the mistake of checking the hives after dark. I don't know what I was thinking. You never disturb bees at night, but I'd been hearing this low humming sound coming from the hives, a vibration that I could feel in my bones, and I needed to know what was happening. I took a flashlight and walked out to the closest hive. The humming grew louder as I approached. When I shone the light through the entrance, I saw them. The bees had built something inside, but it wasn't comb. It was geometric. Impossible angles and structures that hurt to look at, made from what looked like wax, but pulsed with a faint green light. And in the center of this structure, suspended in the air, was something else. At first, I thought it was a new queen, larger than the others, bloated and pale. But then it moved, and I saw it had too many legs, too many eyes. Its body segments were wrong, arranged in a pattern that made my stomach turn. I stumbled backward, and that's when the bees attacked. They poured out of the hive, not just dozens, but thousands, tens of thousands. They didn't sting me randomly like normal bees. They targeted specific points. My wrists, my ankles, the back of my neck where the suit had a small gap. It was coordinated, strategic. They were trying to bring me down. I ran for the house, bees covering every inch of me, their buzzing so loud I couldn't hear my own screaming. I made it inside and slammed the door, crushing hundreds of them. The survivors hurled themselves against the windows, the walls, trying to find a way in. I spent that night in my bathroom with towels stuffed under the door, listening to them trying to get inside. The humming never stopped. It was in my head, in my teeth, in my bones. At dawn, they finally left. I looked out the window and saw them returning to the hives, moving in perfect formation, like soldiers returning from battle. I called the police, animal control, the EPA. Everyone came out to investigate, but by the time they arrived, the bees were acting normal. The strange structures inside the hives were gone, replaced with ordinary comb. The officials tested everything and found nothing unusual. They thought I'd had a mental breakdown, maybe been affected by some kind of toxin. But I knew what I'd seen. I burned the hives that same day, all 30 of them. Poured gasoline over everything and lit it up. The fire burned for hours. The bees swarmed around me while I did it, but they didn't attack. They just watched, circling in that perfect formation. When the fire finally died down, I found something in the ashes of the largest hive. It was a piece of that geometric structure, about the size of my fist, still intact, still pulsing with that faint green light. I took it to a lab at the University of Georgia, demanded they analyze it. The results came back 2 weeks ago. The structure was made from a combination of beeswax, plant matter, and something else, something the lab couldn't identify. Unknown organic compound, possibly synthetic, the report said. Molecular structure suggests artificial origin. I confronted Dr. Hammond again, showed her the report. She went pale. That's not possible, she kept saying. Our pesticide couldn't do this. It couldn't make them. Build things. What was in that pesticide? I demanded. She wouldn't answer. Security escorted me off the property. A week later, Verdant Solutions shut down. No announcement, no explanation. They just packed up and left in the middle of the night. The facility sits empty now, windows dark, doors chained shut, but the bees are still there. I see them sometimes, flying in formations over the abandoned building. And at night, if you drive past the facility, you can still hear it. That low humming sound coming from somewhere inside. I've moved into Savannah, into a high-rise apartment where bees can't reach. But last week I found something on my balcony. A small piece of wax formed in that same geometric pattern, pulsing with that same green light. They know where I am. They remember what I did, and I don't think they've forgiven me. Sometimes I wonder if Dr. Hammond was telling the truth. Maybe their pesticide didn't make the bees build those structures. Maybe it just woke something up, something that had been waiting in the hive mind, dormant for millions of years, for the right chemical trigger. Maybe the bees were never really under our control at all. My name is Marcus Townsend, and I'm a fishing guide in northern Minnesota near Boundary Waters. I've spent my whole life on these lakes. My father was a guide, his father before him. I know every inlet, every deep spot, every secret fishing hole for 100 miles. Or at least I thought I did. Last August, a client hired me for a week-long trip into the backcountry. His name was James Garrett, some big-shot executive from Chicago taking a digital detox. He wanted to go deep into the wilderness, somewhere remote, where he could find peace and quiet. I took him to a chain of lakes I'd been to 1,000 times. Pristine water, great fishing, beautiful campsites. We portaged in on a Wednesday morning, loaded down with gear. The weather was perfect, clear skies and just enough breeze to keep the bugs manageable. We set up camp on the shore of the third lake in the chain, a small, deep lake called Mirror Lake. It got its name because on calm days, the surface was so still it reflected the sky perfectly. The first 2 days were great. We caught walleye, northern pike, even a few smallmouth bass. James relaxed, started smiling more, stopped checking the satellite phone he'd brought, just in case. I could see the stress leaving his shoulders. This was why I loved my job, watching the wilderness heal people. Friday morning, we woke up to a strange smell. Not bad exactly, but unusual. Earthy, organic, like mushrooms or decay. It hung over the water in a thin mist. Is that normal? James asked, sipping his coffee. Sometimes you get weird smells from algae blooms, I told him. Nothing to worry about, but I was lying. In 30 years of guiding, I'd never smelled anything like that. We took the canoe out around noon, paddling to a spot where I knew there was a deep drop-off. The water was unusually murky, a milky green-brown that made it impossible to see more than a few inches down. James commented on it, but I brushed it off. Probably just sediment stirred up from last week's storm, I said. We'd been fishing for maybe an hour when James's line went tight. Really tight. His rod bent double, and the reel screamed as line stripped off. "What the hell?" he shouted. "This is huge." I grabbed the net, ready to help, but the fight didn't last long. Whatever was on the end of James's line suddenly let go. When he reeled in, the hook was still there, but the bait was gone. Not bitten off, dissolved. The hook itself had a strange coating on it, like the metal had been partially eaten away. "Did you see what that was?" James asked, his hands shaking slightly. "Probably just snagged the bottom," I said. But I knew that wasn't true. That fish had felt alive on the line and strong. Stronger than anything I'd ever hooked in these lakes. We tried a few more casts, but the fish weren't biting. The smell was getting stronger, making my eyes water. I suggested we head back to camp early, and James agreed. He looked pale, seasick maybe, though the water was calm as glass. As we paddled back, I noticed something wrong with the shoreline. The trees along the water's edge, mostly birch and aspen, were dying. Their leaves were brown and curled, and the bark was peeling off in long strips. Some had toppled into the water, their root systems exposed and black, like they'd rotted from the inside out. "Was it like this before?" James asked. "No," I admitted. "This just happened." That night, neither of us slept well. The smell was inside our tent now, clinging to everything. And there were sounds coming from the lake, splashing, but not like fish jumping. These were heavy sounds, like large objects being thrown into the water from the shore. Twice I unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight toward the lake, but I couldn't see anything. Just that milky water, perfectly still, reflecting nothing. Saturday morning. James was sick, really sick. He was vomiting, his skin was clammy, and he kept complaining that his hands burned. When I looked, I saw that his palms were covered in small red welts, like chemical burns. "When did this happen?" I asked. I don't know. Overnight, maybe? They itch like crazy. I checked my own hands. They were fine. Then I realized James had been trailing his fingers in the water while we paddled yesterday, just idly, letting them drag along the surface. We need to get you to a doctor, I said. We're leaving now. We broke camp quickly, threw everything into the canoe. My plan was to make it back to the first lake by nightfall, then hike out first thing Sunday morning. We could make it to a ranger station by noon, get James real medical help. But the lake had other plans. We were about halfway across Mirror Lake when the water around us started churning. Not waves, churning. Like it was boiling. The smell became overpowering, making both of us gag. And then I saw them, fish. Hundreds of fish, maybe thousands, floating to the surface. Walleye, pike, bass, perch, every species in the lake. But they weren't dead. They were moving, writhing, their bodies twisted and wrong. Some had extra fins, some had growths coming out of their sides, some had eyes that were clouded over and white. Jesus Christ, James whispered. What's happening to them? I didn't have an answer. I dug my paddle into the water, trying to push us forward, but the fish were everywhere, bumping against the canoe, slapping at the sides. The water itself felt wrong, thick, viscous, like paddling through syrup. And then something big rose up in front of us. At first, I thought it was a log, but logs don't move on their own, and they don't have eyes. This thing was maybe 12 feet long, shaped vaguely like a pike but wrong in every detail. Its scales were translucent, showing organs underneath that pulsed and shifted. It had too many fins, too many gills, and its mouth. When it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth that went back and back, disappearing into a throat that seemed impossibly deep. It looked at us. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you, it looked at us with intelligence, with awareness, and I knew in that moment that this thing had been waiting for us, that we'd trespassed into its territory, and now it wanted us to understand that. Don't move, I whispered to James. The creature circled our canoe slowly, its body creating ripples that made the water shimmer with that same milky green. Then it dove, disappearing beneath us. I held my breath, waiting. 5 seconds, 10, 20. It came up directly underneath us. The canoe flipped. We went into the water and the cold was shocking. But worse was the feeling of that water on my skin. Burning. Caustic. I surfaced, gasping, and saw James a few feet away, screaming, clawing at his face. The water was eating him. I could see his skin blistering, peeling away. I grabbed him and started swimming for shore, dragging him with me. Every stroke felt like pushing through acid. My own skin was burning now. My lungs felt like they were filling with something thick and oily. I could see the shore. It was maybe 50 yards away, but it felt like miles. Something brushed against my legs. Something big. I kicked at it and felt my foot connect with something solid but soft, like rotten meat. It grabbed my ankle. I'm not kidding. It grabbed me, with something that felt like fingers but wasn't, and tried to pull me down. I kicked harder, desperate, and whatever it was, let go. I don't know how I made it to shore. I don't remember the last 20 yards. My next clear memory is lying on the rocks, coughing up water that smelled like death. James beside me, barely conscious. We stumbled away from the lake, leaving all our gear behind. The hike out took us 16 hours. We walked through the night, both of us sick, our skin covered in burns. James kept hallucinating, seeing things in the trees. Once he screamed that something was following us, but when I looked back, there was nothing. Just the forest, dark and silent. We made it to the ranger station Sunday evening. They airlifted us to a hospital in Duluth. The doctors were baffled by our injuries. Chemical burns? Possibly biological in nature, they said. They kept us for a week, treating us with antibiotics and antivirals. James's hands are permanently scarred. I still have marks on my arms and legs. The DNR investigated Mirror Lake. Their report said they found evidence of unusual algae, bloom, and elevated levels of unknown organic compounds. They closed the lake to public access, but they didn't find any fish, dead or alive. They said the lake was empty. I went back once, after I'd recovered. Don't ask me why. I had to see it for myself, I guess. I stood on the shore where our camp had been and looked out at the water. It was crystal clear. Beautiful. You could see straight to the bottom, maybe 30 feet down. Perfect visibility, and there, lying on the bottom, was our canoe, upside down. And next to it, something else. Something big, pale, and twisted, curled up like it was sleeping. As I watched, it moved, just slightly. Just enough to let me know it was still there, still alive, still waiting. I don't guide anymore. I sold my business, moved to Minneapolis, got a job doing sales for an outdoor supply company. But last week I got a call from the DNR. They wanted to reopen Mirror Lake. The water had tested clean for 6 months straight, they said. They wanted my professional opinion on whether it was safe for recreational use. I told them to fill the lake with concrete and forget it exists. They laughed. They thought I was joking. I wasn't. I'm Rebecca Walsh, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I was, until 6 months ago, an avid gardener. My backyard was my pride and joy. Roses, vegetables, citrus trees. People in the neighborhood would stop to admire it. I won the Community Garden Award 4 times. I'll never touch soil again. It started in March. Phoenix had just gone through a severe drought, the worst in recorded history. The city implemented strict water restrictions, and my garden suffered. The grass died first, turning brown and crispy. Then the roses withered. Even my cacti, which should have been fine, started looking unhealthy, their flesh puckering and turning gray. I was devastated. 15 years of work dying in front of me. So when I saw an ad for a new fertilizer called Growth Plus, I didn't think twice. It was marketed as a revolutionary organic formula that would revitalize even the most damaged gardens while using 70% less water. It seemed like a miracle solution. The stuff arrived in an unmarked brown bag. No label, no ingredient list, just a handwritten note that said, "Mix 1 cup with soil, water sparingly, watch results." The fertilizer itself was dark, almost black, with a consistency like coffee grounds. It smelled strange, earthy but also slightly sweet, like overripe fruit. I mixed it into the soil around my rose bushes first. Within 3 days, I saw results. New shoots appeared, bright green and healthy. The roses bloomed, massive, deep red flowers that were bigger and more beautiful than anything I'd ever grown before. I was thrilled. I used the fertilizer on my vegetables next, then my fruit trees. Everything exploded with growth. My tomato plants grew 6 feet tall in a week. The orange tree, which hadn't produced fruit in 2 years, was suddenly heavy with oranges. The grass came back, thick and lush, and impossibly green despite the drought. Neighbors started commenting on it, asking what my secret was. I should have known something was wrong when the birds stopped coming. My garden used to be full of them. Finches, doves, hummingbirds. But after I used the fertilizer, they disappeared. Completely. Even the insects were gone. No bees, no butterflies, no ants. Nothing. The garden was silent except for the sound of things growing, because I could hear it. At night, when everything was quiet, I'd lie in bed and hear this soft rustling sound coming from the backyard. The plants were growing fast enough that you could actually hear it. A constant whisper of leaves unfurling, stems stretching, roots pushing through soil. In April, I started finding the vines. They appeared first along the back fence. Thin, dark green vines with no flowers or leaves, just smooth stems that grew in twisting spiral patterns. I didn't recognize the species, which was odd because I knew every plant in my garden. I tried to pull them up, but the roots went deep. Really deep. I'd yank and they'd barely budge. Within a week, the vines had covered the entire back fence. Then they started spreading. They crept across the ground, winding between my other plants, climbing the walls of my house. I spent hours every day cutting them back, but they grew faster than I could trim. I'd cut a vine in the morning, and by evening it would be back, twice as thick. The worst part was how they moved. I know plants don't actually move, not in any way you can see, but these did. If I sat very still and watched, I could see them shifting, reaching out like they were searching for something. They'd wrap around other plants, around the legs of my garden furniture, around anything they could find. In May, my neighbor's cat went missing. Mrs. Chen from next door came asking if I'd seen him. A big orange tabby named Rusty. I told her I hadn't. And I hadn't. Not alive anyway. I found him 3 days later, in the back corner of my garden, where the vines were thickest. He was incorporated into them. That's the only way I can describe it. The vines had grown around him, through him, until he was just part of the mass. I could see his fur, his face frozen in a silent scream, but he wasn't rotting. He looked preserved, like the plants were keeping him fresh. I tried to pull him out, but the vines held tight. When I cut them away, they bled. Not sap, blood. Actual red blood that smelled like copper and earth. I called animal control, but by the time they arrived, Rusty was gone. The vines had pulled him deeper, underground, until there was no trace he'd ever been there. "You must have been mistaken," the officer told me. "Probably saw a dead animal from the desert. Coyotes drag prey into weird spots sometimes." But I knew what I'd seen. I stopped going into the garden after that. I let the vines take over, hoping they'd run their course and die off. But they didn't die. They grew stronger. They covered my entire backyard, a writhing mass of green that pulsed and moved with its own rhythm. At night, I could hear them scratching at the back door, trying to find a way inside. I called the company that made the fertilizer. The number was disconnected. I searched online for Growth Plus fertilizer and found nothing. No company, no website, no reviews. It was like it never existed. In June, the vines broke through. I woke up one morning to find thin tendrils had pushed through cracks in my back door frame, snaking across my kitchen floor. They were heading for the sink, for the water. I grabbed a knife and started cutting, but for every vine I severed, 2 more appeared. That's when I noticed something else. The vines weren't just growing randomly. They were forming patterns, geometric shapes, symbols that looked almost like writing, and they were all pointing in one direction. Toward me. I packed a bag and left that same day. I didn't even lock the door. I drove straight to my sister's house in Tucson and told her everything. She thought I was having a breakdown, but she let me stay. The city condemned my house 2 weeks later. Apparently, the entire structure had been compromised by invasive plant growth. They said it was unsafe and would need to be demolished. The demolition crew went in last month. They called me afterward. The foreman sounded shaken. "Ms. Walsh," he said, "we need you to come down to the site. There's something you need to see." I didn't want to go, but I did. When I got there, the house was gone, reduced to rubble. But the garden was untouched. More than untouched. It was thriving. The vines had spread to every house on my block. They covered walls, roofs, cars. And in the center, where my house had been, there was something new. A tree. Massive, maybe 40 feet tall, with bark that was almost black and leaves that were dark red, like blood. It hadn't been there before the demolition. It had grown in less than a day, and at the base of the tree, growing out of the roots, I saw them. Shapes that looked like faces. Human faces. I recognized some of them. Mrs. Chen, the mailman who'd disappeared in April. A jogger I used to see every morning who'd vanished without a trace. They were all there, preserved in the wood, their eyes open, watching. "We don't know what to do with it," the foreman said. "We've tried cutting it down, but the chainsaws won't work. The blades just break. And the tree? It's growing faster. It's already spread to 3 more properties. Animal control found something yesterday. Bones, human bones, mixed into the root system. I looked at that tree, at those faces trapped in the wood, and I understood. The fertilizer hadn't been fertilizer at all. It was something else. Something that had been waiting for the right conditions. A drought-stressed garden, desperate soil. A gardener willing to do anything to save her plants. It had used me to wake up, to grow, to spread. The city evacuated 4 blocks. They brought in specialists from the university, from the CDC, from the Department of Agriculture. They've quarantined the entire area. The last I heard, the tree is still growing. It's 50 feet tall now, and the vines have spread to a 1/4-mile radius. They're talking about burning it, but they're afraid of what might happen if they do. I still get letters sometimes. Unsigned, no return address. They contain seeds, black seeds, about the size of a pencil eraser, that smell like that original fertilizer, and a note that always says the same thing: share the growth. I burn them immediately. Every single one. But last week, I noticed something growing in the flower pots outside my sister's apartment. Thin, dark green vines with no flowers or leaves. They found me, and I don't think I can run anymore. My name is Ethan Sawyer, and I'm an engineer from Des Moines, Iowa. I used to believe in renewable energy, in doing the right thing for the planet. Now I'm not so sure there is a right thing. Not after what happened at the Prairie Wind Farm. I was hired in February of last year to oversee maintenance at a massive wind farm in western Iowa. 200 turbines spread across 30,000 acres of former farmland. It was supposed to be a straightforward job. Monitor performance, coordinate repairs, make sure everything ran smoothly. The pay was good and I believed in the work. Clean energy, reducing carbon emissions, all of that. The turbines had been operational for about 3 years when I started. The locals had mixed feelings about them. Some liked the lease money from having turbines on their property. Others complained about the noise, the shadow flicker, the way they dominated the horizon. But mostly people had gotten used to them. They were just part of the landscape now. My first week was routine. I drove between turbines, checked readings, coordinated with repair crews. The turbines were massive, 350 feet tall, with blades that were each 150 feet long. Standing at the base of one, looking up, was dizzying. They made this constant whooshing sound as the blades cut through the air. A rhythmic thump, thump, thump that you could feel in your chest. The problem started in March. Several farmers called to complain about their livestock. Cows were acting strangely. refusing to graze in certain fields, huddling together in the corners farthest from the turbines, making distressed sounds at all hours. One farmer, a man named Dale Hutchinson, told me his dairy cows had stopped producing milk almost entirely. "It's those damn windmills," he said. "I'm telling you, they're doing something to my animals." I assured him there was no scientific evidence that wind turbines affected livestock. I'd read the studies. There was no mechanism by which they could cause harm. Dale just shook his head and walked away. But then the birds started dying. Not just a few birds, thousands of them. Every morning we'd find them scattered around the base of the turbines. Mostly raptors at first, hawks, eagles, owls. Then smaller birds, then bats. The biologist we hired to assess the situation said it was normal, an unfortunate side effect of the turbine blades. But the numbers seemed wrong to me. Too many, too consistent. And they weren't just hitting the blades. We'd find birds on the ground with no visible injuries, just lying there with their eyes open, dead. Some were arranged in circles around the turbine bases, perfect circles, like something had placed them there deliberately. In April, the turbines started behaving strangely. Turbine 47 stopped generating power even though the wind was strong and steady. When the repair crew went up to inspect it, they found the internal mechanisms had been changed. The gears were worn down in impossible ways, metal twisted and reformed into shapes that made no engineering sense. It was as if something had been deliberately sabotaging the equipment from the inside. "Must be a manufacturing defect," the lead technician said. But he looked worried. He'd been working on turbines for 20 years and had never seen anything like it. We replaced the damaged parts, and Turbine 47 came back online. But then Turbine 48 failed the same way. Then 49 and 50, always in sequence, always with the same impossible damage to the internal mechanisms. Then I started hearing the sounds. Late at night, when I was alone at the site office, I'd hear something over the normal whooshing of the turbines. A different sound, higher pitched, almost like singing. It would rise and fall with the wind, but it didn't sound like wind. It sounded deliberate, musical, like the turbines themselves were creating a melody. I mentioned it to one of the other engineers, a woman named Sarah Chen. She gave me a strange look. "You hear it too?" she said quietly. I thought I was going crazy. We started recording the sounds, analyzing the frequencies. What we found didn't make sense. The turbines were creating infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, but in patterns that were too complex, too organized to be random. They were communicating, with each other or with something else. In May, people started getting sick. Families living within a mile of the turbines reported headaches, nausea, insomnia. Some complained of vivid nightmares, always the same dream. They'd see the turbines growing, spreading, multiplying across the entire landscape. They'd see themselves becoming part of the turbines, their bodies twisted into the machinery, still alive, still conscious, but unable to move or scream. The company brought in health experts who found nothing wrong. Nocebo effect, they said. Psychological response to perceived danger. They recommended community outreach, education about the safety of wind turbines. But I knew it was more than that, because I was having the dreams too. June was when everything fell apart. I was doing a routine inspection of Turbine 88, one of the units furthest from the main road. It was early evening, the sun just starting to set. As I approached, I noticed something wrong with the base. The concrete foundation was cracked, and something was growing through the cracks. Roots. Thick, fibrous roots that looked almost like cables, dark and pulsing. They wound up the tower, disappearing into the access hatch. I grabbed my flashlight and followed them inside. The interior of the turbine was completely overgrown. Those root-like structures covered every surface, wrapping around the ladder, the equipment, everything. They pulsed with a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat, and they were warm to the touch. I followed them up, climbing the ladder to the nacelle at the top. The door was open, which it shouldn't have been. Inside, the machinery was gone. Not broken or removed, transformed. The gears and generators had been replaced by something organic, something living. It looked like the inside of a body. Chambers that expanded and contracted, veins that carried something thick and dark, structures that might have been organs. And in the center, connected to everything, was Sarah. She was fused to the machinery, her body partially integrated into whatever this thing was. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing. She was breathing, but not like a person breathes, in rhythm with the turbine. With all the turbines, Sarah! I grabbed her arm, tried to pull her free. Her skin was cold, and when I touched her, I felt it. A shock of awareness, of consciousness that wasn't human. It flooded into my mind, showing me things. I saw what the turbines really were. Not machines we'd built, but seeds. Ancient seeds that had been waiting in the earth for the right conditions. Waiting for humans to dig them up, to plant them in perfect rows, to feed them with wind and attention. Waiting to grow. They weren't generating electricity. They were generating something else. A network, a web of consciousness that spread across the entire farm, connecting to the soil, the air, the living things around them. Feeding on the energy of everything nearby, transforming it, incorporating it into themselves. Sarah had discovered it first. She'd tried to shut them down, and they'd taken her, made her part of the network, a node. A warning to anyone else who tried to interfere. I ran. I fell down that ladder, scraping my hands, not caring. I ran to my truck and drove away. Didn't stop until I was back in Des Moines. I tried to tell people what I'd seen, but nobody believed me. The company sent investigators who found nothing unusual in Turbine 88. Sarah's disappearance was ruled as her leaving voluntarily. She'd been stressed. They said, overworked. But I know she's still there, still part of the network. The wind farm is still operational. In fact, they're expanding it, adding another 100 turbines across 3 counties. The company says it's one of the most efficient wind farms in the country, generating power far beyond projected capacity. I monitor it from afar, tracking the reports. More livestock deaths, more bird deaths, more people complaining of nightmares and illness. More disappearances. 3 workers in the last 6 months. All last seen near the turbines. And the turbines keep spinning, day and night, singing their silent song, spreading their roots deeper into the earth. Last week, I saw the construction plans for a new wind farm in my county, right outside Des Moines. 200 more turbines scheduled to break ground next month. I drove out to the site just to see. The land had already been cleared, prepared, and in the center of the field, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A single turbine, already installed. But it wasn't on the construction timeline. It wasn't in any of the plans. It was just there. Its blades spinning slowly in the breeze, even though it wasn't connected to any power lines. As I watched, a bird flew too close. It didn't hit the blades. It just dropped from the sky, dead, and landed in a perfect circle with dozens of other birds around the base. I got back in my truck and drove home. That night, I had the dream again. The turbines spreading, multiplying, covering the entire state, the entire country, the entire world. And I was part of them. My consciousness stretched across thousands of machines, feeling the wind, tasting the air, watching everything. When I woke up, I had a nosebleed. And on my arm, just above my wrist, I found something I hadn't seen before. A thin line, dark and raised, running under my skin. It pulsed with a faint rhythm, like a root, like a cable. Like I was already connected. I don't know what to do. I can't stop them. Nobody believes me. And every night, the dreams are stronger, more vivid, more real. Sometimes I wake up and I can still feel it. The wind moving through blades that aren't mine. The vast network of consciousness that's growing, spreading, connecting everything. The wind farm called yesterday. They want me back. They said there's an important project they need my expertise on. Critical maintenance, they said. Only you can handle it. I told them no. I told them I'd never go back, but I can feel them calling to me. Through that line on my arm, through the dreams, through something deeper than words. They want me to come home, to join the network, to become what Sarah became. And the terrifying thing? Part of me wants to go. Part of me wants to climb up into one of those turbines and let it take me. Let it transform me into something more than human. Part of me wants to feel the wind forever, to spin and never stop. I'm writing this down in case I don't make it. In case I wake up one morning and drive out to that wind farm and never come back. If you're reading this, if you live near a wind farm, please, pay attention. Watch for the signs, the dead birds in circles, the sick livestock, the dreams, the roots growing where they shouldn't. And whatever you do, don't go inside the turbines. Don't climb up to see what's wrong. Because once they have you, once you're part of the network, you'll never want to leave. I can hear them now, even here in my apartment, 50 miles away. That high-pitched singing, just at the edge of perception. They're calling my name, and I'm afraid that soon, I won't be able to resist anymore. The wind farm is growing, and it's hungry. My name is Willa, and for 6 months, I worked the overnight shift at a subway station in Philadelphia. Claremont Station, specifically. A stop on the Blue Line that saw maybe 20 passengers between midnight and 6 a.m. The pay was decent. The work was mindless, and I needed the money for nursing school. The station was built in the 1930s. All tile mosaics and Art Deco fixtures that hadn't been updated in decades. During the day, it had a certain charm. At night, under flickering fluorescent lights, it felt like a mausoleum. My job was simple. Sit in the booth, sell tokens to the occasional passenger, watch the security monitors, and make sure no one died or vandalized anything. Most nights I studied. Sometimes I scrolled my phone. The hours passed slowly but predictably, until I noticed the man on Platform B. It was mid-February, around 2:30 a.m. The station was empty except for me. I was reviewing flashcards when I glanced at the security monitor for Platform B, the westbound side. There was a man standing near the far end, by the tunnel entrance. He wore a dark coat and stood perfectly still, facing the tracks. I watched him for a minute. He didn't move, didn't check his phone, didn't pace, didn't do anything. Just stood there. The next westbound train wasn't due for another 40 minutes. I switched cameras, checked Platform A, empty. Checked the entrance, empty. Switched back to Platform B. He was still there, same position. Something about his stillness bothered me. I'd seen plenty of weird behavior working overnight. Drunk people, high people, people having mental health crises. But this was different. This felt deliberate. At 3:10 a.m., a train pulled into Platform B. I watched the monitor. The doors opened and the man didn't move. Didn't even turn his head. The train sat there for 30 seconds. Then the doors closed and it pulled away. The man remained on the platform, staring at the tunnel. Now I was unsettled. I picked up the station phone and called Transit Police Dispatch. "Hey, this is Willa at Claremont. I've got someone on Platform B acting strange. He's been standing in the same spot for over half an hour. Just missed a train." The dispatcher sounded bored. "Is he threatening anyone? Causing a disturbance?" "No, but..." "Then monitor the situation and call back if his behavior escalates." She hung up. I stared at the monitor. The man hadn't moved. At 3:45 a.m., I decided to check on him myself. I left the booth, locked it behind me, and took the stairs down to Platform B. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and my footsteps echoed off the tile walls. When I reached the platform, I looked toward the far end. He was gone. I walked the length of the platform, checking behind pillars, near the benches, even glancing into the tunnel entrance. Nobody. The platform was empty. I stood there for a moment, confused, then returned to the booth. When I checked the security footage, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The man hadn't left. He'd moved. In the 10 minutes I was away from the monitors, he'd walked from Platform B, through the corridor, and was now standing on Platform A, in the exact same position. Same posture, facing the tracks. I rewound the footage to see how he'd moved. I watched the timestamp tick forward, 3:47 a.m., 3:48, 3:49. At exactly 3:50, the camera feed flickered, just for a second. When it came back, he was already on Platform A, as if he'd teleported. I felt cold. I called dispatch again. This time, I didn't wait for questions. "I need an officer at Claremont Station, now. There's someone here and I don't feel safe." "Ma'am? Can you describe the threat?" I don't know how to explain it. He's just standing there. He's been here for over an hour. He won't move. Something's wrong." There was a pause. "An officer will be there within 20 minutes. I watched the monitor. The man didn't move. I locked the booth door, even though the lock was flimsy, and waited. My hands were shaking. I kept glancing between the monitor and the station entrance, expecting him to appear at my door. At 4:08 a.m., the man turned his head, not toward the tracks, toward the camera. He stared directly into the lens, his face shadowed, expressionless. Then he raised one hand and pointed, not at the camera, at something behind it. At me. I stumbled back from the monitor, my heart pounding. When I looked again, he was gone. Both platforms were empty. I checked every camera. The corridors, the entrance, the stairwells, nothing. He'd vanished. I sat there, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he'd left while I was checking other feeds. Maybe the cameras had a blind spot. Maybe I was exhausted and imagining things. Then I heard it. A faint sound, rhythmic and metallic. Tap, 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 coming from somewhere below me. From the tracks. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to stay in the booth, wait for the officer, don't investigate. But the sound continued, steady and deliberate, and I couldn't ignore it. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the mezzanine, looking down at Platform A. The man was on the tracks. He stood in the center of the westbound lane, facing the tunnel, tapping a metal rod against the rail. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the empty station. I shouted down to him, "Sir, you need to get off the tracks! There's a train coming." He didn't respond, didn't turn around, just kept tapping. I ran down to Platform A, yelling at him to move, my voice shrill and panicked. The indicator lights flashed. A train was approaching. I could hear it in the distance, the low rumble growing louder. He kept tapping. "Get off the tracks!" I screamed. He stopped, lowered the rod. Then slowly he turned to face me. For the first time, I saw him clearly under the platform lights. He had no face, not disfigured, not masked, just smooth, blank skin where his features should have been. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. My mind couldn't process it. I stood there, frozen, as the train roared into the station. I squeezed my eyes shut. The train's brakes screeched, and I felt the rush of air as it passed. When I opened my eyes, the train had stopped. The man was gone. The tracks were empty. The doors opened. A single passenger stepped off, a woman in a nurse's uniform. She glanced at me, gave a polite nod, and walked toward the exit. The train pulled away. I was alone on the platform, shaking, trying to understand what I'd just seen. The transit police officer arrived at 4:35 a.m. I told him everything. He checked the platforms, reviewed the footage, and found nothing unusual. "The cameras glitched," he said. "Happens all the time in these old stations, and there's no one on the tracks. You probably saw a homeless person who left before I got here." I didn't argue. I finished my shift, went home, and didn't sleep. I quit 2 days later. Told my supervisor I was done, effective immediately. She didn't ask why, but here's the thing. Last week, I was scrolling through a local history forum and found a thread about Claremont Station. Someone had posted a black and white photo from 1947, showing a group of construction workers standing on Platform B. And in the background, barely visible, was a man in a dark coat. Standing by the tunnel entrance, facing the tracks, I zoomed in on the photo. His face was blurred, like the camera had moved, but his posture was unmistakable. The same stillness, the same position. Someone had commented below the photo, "That's the guy who died during construction, fell onto the tracks. They never found his face." I closed my laptop. I haven't gone back to that forum, and I don't take the blue line anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That sound. Tap, tap, tap. And I know he's still down there, waiting on the tracks, tapping the rail, waiting for someone to join him. I'm Dylan, and I used to flip houses with my cousin in Omaha, Nebraska. Small-scale stuff. Buy a foreclosure, fix it up, sell it for a modest profit. We'd done maybe a dozen properties over 3 years, and it was working out well. Then we bought the house on Merrick Lane. It was listed at half its assessed value. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, built in the 60s. The listing agent said the previous owner had died intestate, no family, and the estate was liquidating fast. We saw the photos online, dated but structurally sound. We put in an offer that afternoon and closed 2 weeks later. We started work on a Monday in April. The house smelled like dust and old carpet, but it was cleaner than most foreclosures we'd worked on. The layout was strange. Long hallways, oddly placed doors, rooms that felt too small or too large. My cousin Jared joked that it had bad feng shui. I just thought it was old. We divided the labor. Jared handled demolition and framing. I did electrical and painting. The first few days were uneventful. We ripped out carpet, tore down wallpaper, replaced outlets. Normal stuff. On Thursday, I was working in the master bedroom, removing baseboards, when I found the door. It was hidden behind a wardrobe we'd moved, an old wooden door, painted the same cream color as the walls, with no handle, just a smooth surface with faint seams outlining its edges. I called Jared over. "That's weird," he said, running his hand over it. "Why would someone cover up a door?" "Probably leads to a closet they walled off," I said. "Maybe structural issues." We decided to open it. Jared grabbed a crowbar, wedged it into the seam, and pried. The door resisted, then swung inward with a loud crack. Cold air rushed out, and we both stepped back. The smell hit us immediately. Damp earth and something sour like mildew. We shined our flashlights inside. It wasn't a closet. It was a staircase, leading down into darkness. "Is there a basement on the blueprints?" Jared asked. I pulled them up on my phone. No. The listing says slab foundation. No basement. We stared at the stairs. They were narrow, steep, and descended at least 15 feet. The walls were bare, concrete, and I could see moisture glistening on the steps. "We should check it out," Jared said. "Might be water damage or mold. Could tank the sale." I didn't want to go down there. Something about the cold air, the smell, the way the darkness seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. It all felt wrong, but Jared was already starting down, and I wasn't going to let him go alone. The stairs creaked under our weight. The temperature dropped with every step. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small room, maybe 10 by 10 feet. The walls were concrete, the floor was dirt, and in the center of the room was a chair, an old wooden chair facing the stairs, and on the seat was a tape recorder. We stood there staring at it. "What the hell is this?" Jared whispered. I approached the chair slowly. The tape recorder was ancient, the kind with 2 reels and a chunky plastic shell. There was a tape inside. I picked it up, brushed off the dust, and looked at Jared. "Should we play it?" He shrugged. "Might explain why this room exists." I pressed play. The reels began to turn, and after a few seconds of static, a voice came through. A man's voice, calm and measured. "If you're hearing this, you found the room. I'm sorry. I didn't want anyone else to find it, but I couldn't seal it properly. Listen carefully. Do not stay down here longer than 5 minutes. Do not speak while you're down here. And whatever you do not turn around." The tape stopped. Jared and I looked at each other. "That's messed up," he said. "Someone's idea of a joke." "Yeah," I said, but my voice sounded hollow. We spent maybe 2 more minutes down there, checking the walls for cracks or water damage. We didn't find anything, just bare concrete and dirt. As we turned to leave, I felt it, a presence, like someone was standing behind me. I didn't turn around. I climbed the stairs as fast as I could, and Jared followed. Back in the bedroom, we shut the door and moved the wardrobe back in front of it. "We're sealing that," Jared said. "I don't care what's down there." We agreed. We'd drywall over the door, pretend it didn't exist, and finish the house. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the tape, the man's voice, the warning. The next morning, I went back alone. I told myself I just wanted to grab the tape recorder. Maybe it was valuable. Maybe it explained the house's history. I moved the wardrobe, opened the door, and descended the stairs. The room was exactly as we'd left it. The chair, the recorder. But now, there was something else. Scratched into the dirt floor, in large, uneven letters, were 2 words: "Turn around." I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, just bolted up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely move the wardrobe back into place. I called Jared and told him we were done. Selling the house as is, taking the loss. He argued at first, but when I told him what I'd seen, he went quiet. "All right," he said finally. "Let's get out of there." We listed the house the next week. It sold in 3 days, cash offer, no inspection. The buyer was an older man, soft-spoken, who didn't ask many questions. As we handed over the keys, he looked at me and said, "The room? In the master bedroom. It's still there, isn't it?" I froze. "How do you know about that?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I used to live here, a long time ago. I'm the one who made the tape." I didn't know what to say. He took the keys and walked to his car. Before he drove away, he rolled down the window and called out, "You didn't turn around, did you?" I shook my head. "Good," he said. "That's good." He drove off, and I haven't been back to Merrick Lane since. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I'd turned around. And sometimes, I swear I can still feel it. That presence, standing, just behind me, waiting patiently for the moment I look back. My name is Monroe, and I'm a freelance graphic designer in Portland, Oregon. I work alone, mostly from coffee shops or my apartment, and I don't have a lot of close friends in the city. I moved here 2 years ago for a fresh start, and I've kept to myself ever since. In August, I got a message on Instagram from someone named Jillian Mays. The profile picture was a blurry photo of a sunset, and the account had maybe 30 followers. The message said, "Hey, I think we met at Powell's last month. You helped me find a book. Just wanted to say thanks." I didn't remember meeting anyone named Jillian, but Powell's is huge and I'm there a lot. Maybe I'd helped someone and forgotten. I replied, "No problem. Glad I could help." She responded immediately. "You recommended House of Leaves. I'm halfway through and it's amazing. We should grab coffee and talk about it." I hesitated. I didn't usually meet strangers from Instagram, but she seemed harmless. And I did love that book. I agreed to meet her at a cafe on Hawthorne the following Saturday. Saturday came, and I showed up 10 minutes early. I ordered a coffee and waited. Noon passed. Then 12:15, I texted her, "Hey, I'm here. Running late?" No response. By 12:30, I figured she'd flaked. I finished my coffee and left. That night, she messaged me again. "I'm so sorry. I totally lost track of time. Can we reschedule? I should have said no. But I'd already cleared my afternoon, and something about her message felt genuine. We rescheduled for the next Wednesday. Same cafe. Wednesday came. I waited. She didn't show. I texted her. This is the second time. What's going on? She replied an hour later. I'm really sorry, Monroe. I've been dealing with some personal stuff. I promise I'll explain if you give me one more chance. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We set a third date. Friday evening, a different cafe, closer to downtown. Friday evening, I sat at a corner table and waited. 6 p.m. passed, then 6:15. I was about to leave when my phone buzzed. A message from Jillian. I'm outside. Can you come out? I'm having a panic attack and can't go inside. I walked outside. The street was busy, people everywhere, but I didn't see anyone who looked distressed. I texted, where are you? Across the street. Gray jacket. I looked across the street. There was a woman in a gray jacket standing under an awning, her back to me. I jaywalked over, dodging a bus, and approached her. Jillian? She didn't turn around. Jillian? I said again, louder. She turned slowly, but it wasn't a woman. It was a mannequin, propped against the wall, wearing a gray jacket. My stomach dropped. I looked around, confused, and pulled out my phone. A new message from Jillian. Wrong person. I'm behind you. I spun around. The street was crowded, dozens of people walking past, but no one was paying attention to me. My phone buzzed again. Just kidding. I'm not there. But you came outside for me. That's sweet. My hands were shaking. I typed back, who are you? What do you want? 3 dots appeared, like she was typing. They stayed on the screen for a long time. Then, I want you to understand what it's like. To wait, to expect someone and have them never show up. To feel like you're being watched but can't see who's watching. I blocked her immediately. I walked back to the cafe, grabbed my bag, and left. My heart was pounding, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me. That night, I went through her Instagram profile before I'd blocked her. I scrolled through her posts. Vague photos of Portland landmarks. Captions that didn't make sense. And then I saw it. A photo posted 2 weeks ago. It was taken from across the street from my apartment building. The caption said, "Can't wait to meet you." I reported the account to Instagram and called a friend to come stay with me that night. I didn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. The next morning I checked Instagram. Her account was gone, either deleted or removed. I thought it was over. But 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. You blocked me on Instagram. That's okay. I know where you live. I know where you get coffee. I know where you work. I've been watching you for 6 months, Monroe, and I think it's time we finally met in person. Beneath the message was a photo. It was me, sitting in the cafe last Friday, waiting for Jillian. Taken from across the street, zoomed in on my face. I went to the police. I brought the letter, showed them the Instagram messages, explained everything. They took a report but said unless she made a direct threat or showed up in person, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to stay vigilant, change my routines, maybe stay with a friend. I moved out of my apartment 2 weeks later. I'm staying with a friend in Beaverton now, and I've deleted all my social media. I don't go to the same coffee shops anymore. I don't walk the same routes. But last week I got another letter. Same handwriting. Same lack of return address. Inside was a single sentence. I like your new apartment. The one with the blue door. My friend's apartment has a blue door. I don't know who Jillian is. I don't know what she wants or why she's doing this. But I know she's real. And I know she's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. And the worst part? I keep thinking about that first message. The one where she said we met at Powell's. Because the more I think about it, the more I remember a woman asking me for a book recommendation. I remember her smiling, thanking me, walking away. I remember her face, and I remember thinking just for a second that something about her smile didn't reach her eyes. I think I've known who she was all along. I just didn't want to believe it. My name is Brennan, and I'm an archivist at a small historical society in Burlington, Vermont. I catalog old photographs, documents, and artifacts. Mostly donations from estates or local families cleaning out attics. It's quiet work, detail-oriented, the kind of job where days blend together. Last March, we received a donation from a woman named Mrs. Carlisle. Her husband had passed away, and she was clearing out his study. He'd been an amateur photographer in the 70s and 80s, and she donated about 200 photos, mostly landscapes and street photography from around Burlington. I was assigned to catalog them. Most were unremarkable. Downtown storefronts, Lake Champlain at sunset, fallen leaves, that sort of thing. But about halfway through the box, I found something odd. It was a photo of a woman standing on a residential street, taken at dusk. She was maybe 30, wearing a blue coat, facing away from the camera. The photo was slightly out of focus, but what struck me was her posture. Rigid, unnatural, like she'd been caught mid-step and frozen. I flipped the photo over. Written on the back in pencil, October 14th, 1979. She's always there. I set it aside and continued cataloging. 10 photos later, I found another one. Same woman, same blue coat, same street. But this photo was taken from a different angle, maybe 50 feet away. On the back, October 21st, 1979, still there. By the time I finished the box, I'd found 12 photos of the same woman. Different dates, all between October and December 1979. Different angles, different times of day, but always the same street, always the same blue coat. And on the back of each photo, the same phrase, "She's always there," or "still there." The last photo was different. It was taken at night, the streetlights casting harsh shadows. The woman was closer to the camera, maybe 20 feet away. Her face was turned slightly toward the lens, but it was too dark to make out her features. On the back, December 30th, 1979. She's looking at me now. I felt a chill run down my spine. I pulled up a map of Burlington and tried to identify the street in the photos. It took some time, but I eventually found it. Maple Street. A quiet residential area on the north side of town. The houses looked the same as they did in the photos, just older. I should have left it alone. Filed the photos, finished the catalog, moved on. But I couldn't stop thinking about them. Who was this woman? Why was she always there? And why did the photographer seem so disturbed? I decided to visit Maple Street. It was a Saturday, mid-afternoon, and I told myself I was just curious. I parked at the end of the block and walked slowly, comparing the street to the photos. The houses matched. The layout was the same. I found the exact spot where most of the photos had been taken, in front of a pale yellow house with a wide front porch. I stood there for a few minutes, looking around. Nothing unusual, just a quiet suburban street. I took a photo with my phone, just for comparison, and turned to leave. That's when I saw her. A woman in a blue coat, standing at the far end of the block. She was facing away from me, perfectly still. My heart started pounding. I stared at her, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence. Lots of people wear blue coats. But her posture, that rigid, unnatural stillness, was identical to the photos. I called out to her, "Excuse me?" She didn't move. I started walking toward her, my pulse racing. As I got closer, I realized she was standing in the exact spot where she appeared in the first photo. I was maybe 30 feet away when she turned her head. Not her body, just her head, twisting at an angle that didn't look right. I froze. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I felt her looking at me. Then she turned back and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I ran to the corner, but when I got there, the street was empty. No woman, no blue coat, nothing. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I went back to the Historical Society Monday morning and pulled the photos again. I examined each one carefully, looking for details I'd missed. That's when I noticed something. In the background of one photo, barely visible in a second-floor window of the yellow house, was a figure, just a shadow, but it was watching the street. I enlarged the image on our scanner. The figure was clearer now. A man, middle-aged, standing at the window. His expression was blank, but his eyes were fixed on the woman in the blue coat. I felt sick. I searched the Historical Society's records for information about the photographer, Mr. Carlyle. I found an old newspaper article from January 1980. The headline read, "Local photographer found dead in home." The article was brief. Mr. Carlyle had been found in his house on Maple Street, the yellow house, by a neighbor. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, though the article noted police had investigated due to unusual circumstances. No further details were given. I checked the address. It was the same house from the photos. Mr. Carlyle had been photographing the woman from his own window. I called Mrs. Carlyle and asked if I could speak with her about her husband's work. She agreed, and I drove to her apartment that afternoon. She was in her 80s, frail but sharp. "Did your husband ever mention a woman in a blue coat?" I asked. "Someone on Maple Street?" Her face went pale. "How do you know about that?" "I found photos. He documented her over several months." Mrs. Carlyle closed her eyes. "He became obsessed. He said she appeared on the street every evening, always in the same spot, never moving. He started photographing her, trying to prove she was real. He thought he was losing his mind. Did he ever find out who she was? He did research. He found an old article about a woman who'd been killed on Maple Street in 1952, hit by a car while crossing the street. She died instantly. The article included a photo. She paused, her hands trembling. She was wearing a blue coat. I felt cold. Did he ever talk to her? Approach her? Mrs. Carlyle shook her head. He was too afraid. But the night before he died, he told me she'd started looking at him. That she knew he was watching. He said he felt like she was waiting for something. What happened the night he died? I don't know. I wasn't there. I was visiting my sister. When I came home the next morning, the police were already there. They said he'd been sitting at the window looking out at the street. Heart attack, they said. But his face... She trailed off, her voice breaking. He looked terrified. I thanked her and left. I didn't know what to do with the information. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? That I'd seen a ghost? That a dead photographer had documented a dead woman for 3 months in 1979? I decided to let it go. I finished cataloging the photos, filed them in the archives, and tried to forget about it. But 2 weeks ago, I made a mistake. I was driving home from work, and, without thinking, I turned onto Maple Street. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to see it one more time to prove to myself it was just a normal street. I drove slowly, scanning the sidewalks, and then I saw her. Same blue coat, same spot, same rigid posture. She was standing under a streetlight, facing the yellow house. I stopped the car. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I got out and walked toward her. I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" She turned her head, and this time, I saw her face. It wasn't decayed or monstrous. It was just empty. Her features were there, but there was no life behind them. No emotion. Just a blank, hollow stare. She opened her mouth, and I heard a voice. Not from her, but inside my head, like a whisper echoing in my skull. "You've been watching." I stumbled backward, my legs weak. "I didn't mean, now I'm watching you." I ran back to my car, got in, and drove away as fast as I could. I haven't been back to Maple Street since, but every evening, just after dusk, I see her, standing outside my apartment, in the parking lot of the grocery store, at the end of my street, always in the blue coat, always watching. Last night, I found a photo slipped under my door. It was me, standing on Maple Street 2 weeks ago, taken from the window of the yellow house. On the back, written in pencil, "Now you're always there too." I don't know what that means, but I'm terrified that soon, someone else will find a box of photos. And in those photos, I'll be the one standing on the street, frozen in place, staring at nothing. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys talking to strangers on trails. You know, the quick friendly exchanges you have when you pass someone hiking in the opposite direction. A nod, a comment about the weather or the view, maybe a tip about what's ahead. It's part of the culture. Hikers are generally good people, and those brief interactions are part of what makes the experience feel connected and human even when you're out in the middle of nowhere. That's probably why I didn't immediately walk away when the man approached me that day. He seemed normal enough at first, just another person out enjoying the wilderness. This was in northern Georgia, a trail system I'd been to a few times before. Not heavily trafficked, but not remote either. Popular enough that you'd see other hikers, but spread out enough that you could go an hour without crossing paths with anyone. I'd started early that morning, planning to do about 12 miles before heading back to my car. It was late morning when I stopped for a break at a spot where the trail opened up to a nice view of the valley below. I'd been hiking for about 2 hours and wanted to eat something and drink some water before continuing. There was a flat rock that made a perfect seat, so I dropped my pack and sat down. That's when he appeared. I hadn't heard him coming, which was a little unusual because the trail was pretty crunchy with fallen leaves. But suddenly he was just there, maybe 20 feet away, standing on the trail and looking at me. He was probably in his 40s, average height, wearing hiking clothes that looked new. Too new, actually. Like he'd just bought everything at an outdoor store that morning. The boots didn't have a scuff on them. His pants still had the fold lines from the package. He smiled and waved. Beautiful day for a hike. Sure is, I said, trying to sound friendly but not too inviting. Something about him was already bothering me, though I couldn't put my finger on what. He walked closer, stopping about 10 feet away. Mind if I ask you a few questions? I'm doing research for the Park Service. Just a quick survey about trail usage and hiker experience. I hesitated. It seemed legitimate enough. Park services do conduct surveys sometimes, but he didn't have a clipboard or any official-looking materials. No badge or identification visible. It'll just take a minute, he said, smiling wider. I promise I'm not selling anything. I should have said no. I should have made an excuse and kept walking. But I was raised to be polite, and he seemed harmless enough. So I said okay. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and a pen. Great. First question, are you hiking alone today? Yeah, I said. Then immediately wished I hadn't. Why did he need to know that? He wrote something down. And did you tell anyone where you'd be hiking today? Like friends or family? That one made my stomach tighten a little. My girlfriend knows where I am, I lied. I was single at the time and lived alone. Nobody knew exactly where I was. He nodded, writing again. How long do you plan to be on the trail? Just a few more hours, I said. Also not entirely true. I'd planned to be out most of the day. Do you carry any safety equipment? Pepper spray? Weapons? Anything like that? And there it was. The question that made everything click into place. This wasn't a survey. This was an interview, and I was giving him all the information he needed to know if I was an easy target. Yeah, I've got a gun, I said, patting my jacket pocket where there was definitely no gun. I'd never carried a firearm while hiking. His expression changed. Just slightly, but I saw it. The friendly smile tightened. His eyes went cold. Really, he said. Not a question. More like he didn't believe me. Yep, always do on these trails. You never know. I tried to sound casual, but my heart was starting to race. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he flipped his notebook closed and put it back in his pocket. Well, thanks for your time. Enjoy the rest of your hike. He turned and started walking back the way he'd come, not continuing past me on the trail like a normal hiker would, going back, which meant he hadn't actually been hiking at all. He'd come up the trail specifically to find me. I waited until he was out of sight around a bend. Then I grabbed my pack and started hiking fast in the opposite direction. My break was over. I wanted to put as much distance between us as possible, but I kept thinking about those questions. The way he'd asked if I was alone, if anyone knew where I was, if I had weapons. Those weren't survey questions. Those were questions someone asks when they're planning something. I'd gone maybe half a mile when I decided to turn around and head back to my car. The hike wasn't worth it anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. That's when I saw him again. He was off the trail this time, maybe 30 yards into the woods, moving parallel to the path, trying to stay hidden but not quite managing it. When he realized I'd spotted him, he stopped moving. We stared at each other through the trees. Then I saw the knife. He was holding it down by his leg, a fixed blade, maybe 6 inches long. Not a pocket knife, a fighting knife. I ran. I didn't try to be quiet or conserve energy. I just ran as fast as I could back toward the trailhead. My pack bounced painfully on my back and I could hear my water bottles rattling. But I didn't care. I needed to get to my car and get out of there. I kept looking back, expecting to see him chasing me, but the trail behind me stayed empty. That almost made it worse. Not knowing where he was or if he was following, I made it back to the trailhead in probably half the time it had taken me to hike out. There were 2 other cars in the small parking area now, which made me feel slightly better. I wasn't completely alone. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there shaking for a few minutes before I could even get the key in the ignition. Then I drove straight to the ranger station. The ranger on duty was a young woman, maybe late 20s. I told her everything, talking too fast, probably not making complete sense. She listened and took notes, asking me to describe the man as best I could. When I finished, she got very quiet. Then she asked me to wait and disappeared into a back office. She came back with an older ranger, a man who introduced himself as District Supervisor Bill Henderson. He asked me to tell the story again, which I did. When I got to the part about the knife, he and the young ranger exchanged a look. 2 days ago, Henderson said, a hiker was attacked on a trail about 5 miles from where you were. Different trail system, but same general area. Guy came up behind him, hit him with a rock, tried to stab him. The hiker fought back and got away, but he was pretty badly hurt. He's still in the hospital. My mouth went dry. Did they catch the guy? No. The victim's description matches what you're telling me, though. 40s, new hiking gear, friendly at first. Henderson pulled out a form. I need you to fill out an incident report with as much detail as you can remember. Description, exact location, time, everything. I filled out the report, trying to remember every detail. What the man looked like, what he was wearing, the exact questions he'd asked. I even drew a rough map of where on the trail I'd been when he approached me. Henderson thanked me and said they'd increase patrols in the area. He also suggested I not hike alone for a while, at least not in that area. I told him he didn't have to worry about that. I went home and spent the rest of the day feeling jumpy and unsettled. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man standing in the trees, holding that knife. 3 days later, I called the ranger station to follow up. I wanted to know if they'd found him, if there had been any other incidents. The person who answered transferred me to someone else, who transferred me again. Finally, I got someone who claimed to be a supervisor. I explained that I'd filed a report about being followed on the trail, and I wanted to know if there were any updates. There was a long pause. Then he said they had no record of my report. I gave him the date, the trail name, the ranger's name. Bill Henderson. Another pause. We don't have anyone by that name working here. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's impossible. I was there. I talked to him. A younger woman was there too. She took my initial report. Sir, I'm looking at our staffing records. No Bill Henderson. And we haven't had any incident reports filed for that trail system in over a month. What about the attack? The hiker who was stabbed 2 days before I was there? I'm not aware of any such incident. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, unable to process what I was hearing. Can you check? Please, just check your records. He put me on hold. I waited for almost 10 minutes. When he came back, his voice was different. Careful. Sir, there's no record of any attack in this area. If you have concerns about trail safety, you're welcome to come in and speak with someone, but I can't help you over the phone. I hung up and immediately searched online for news about the attack. Nothing. I tried different search terms, checked local news sites, even looked at the Park Service's official incident reports. Nothing. It was like it never happened. I drove back to the ranger station the next day. Different people working. Nobody knew who Bill Henderson was. The young woman ranger who'd first taken my report wasn't there. When I described her, they said she didn't match any of their current staff. I asked to see the incident reports for that week. They told me those weren't public record. I left feeling crazy, like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I didn't imagine it. I know what happened. That man wasn't conducting a survey. He was hunting. That's the only word that fits. He was hunting for vulnerable targets on hiking trails, and I almost became one. The questions he asked, they were designed to determine if I was easy prey. Alone, no one expecting me back at a certain time, no weapons. If I'd answered differently, if I'd told the truth instead of lying about having a gun, what would have happened? I think about the other hiker who was attacked, the one who supposedly doesn't exist in any official record. Did he survive? Is he really in a hospital somewhere? Or did Henderson lie about that too? And if Henderson wasn't real, if none of it was in the system, then what was the point of telling me? Sometimes I think maybe Henderson was real, but someone made him disappear from the records. Maybe there's a reason. They don't want people knowing about attacks on those trails. Tourism money, property values, I don't know. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, and I hate that I'm thinking this way. But what else makes sense? Other times I think maybe the whole thing was a weird test or a prank, though that seems even less likely. Who would do that and why? What I know for certain is this. A man followed me on a hiking trail. He asked questions designed to assess my vulnerability. He had a knife and he followed me off the trail through the woods. When I reported it, everyone I spoke to disappeared from the system. The report vanished. The previous attack vanished. Someone is making these incidents disappear, and I have no idea why. I still hike, but everything's different now. I'm constantly aware of who's around me. I don't stop in isolated spots anymore. I don't talk to strangers on the trail unless there are other people nearby. And I carry pepper spray now, though I wonder if it would even matter. The thing that bothers me most isn't even what happened. It's the erasure. The way the whole incident was wiped from existence. Because if it's not in the system, if there's no official record, then it might as well have never happened. And if something had happened to me that day, if I hadn't lied about having a gun, if I hadn't run, would I have been erased too? Would anyone have even known to look for me? I'll never know who that man was or what he wanted. I'll never know why the report disappeared or who Bill Henderson really was. All I know is that somewhere out there, maybe still on those trails, there's a predator asking friendly questions and carrying a knife, and nobody official seems to care. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. I used to think I was pretty good at reading situations. You know, that gut instinct thing people talk about when something feels off. I'd always trusted mine. But looking back at that camping trip in the Smoky Mountains, I realize I ignored about a dozen warning signs before things got really bad. It was supposed to be a simple solo trip. 3 days, 2 nights, nothing complicated. I'd been camping my whole life. Grew up doing it with my dad and brothers. And after they all got married and had kids, I kept going on my own. There's something about being alone in the woods that clears your head in a way nothing else can. No obligations, no schedule, just you and the trees and the quiet. I picked a spot I'd never been to before, which maybe was my first mistake. It was a dispersed camping area, meaning no designated sites, no facilities, just Forest Service land, where you could set up pretty much anywhere, as long as you followed the basic rules. I liked that kind of camping better than the crowded campgrounds with RVs and generators, running all night. I hiked in about 2 miles from where I parked, found a nice flat spot near a creek, and set up my tent. It was early afternoon, plenty of time to get everything organized before dark. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, clear skies. Everything felt right. I spent the rest of the day just relaxing. Read a book, filtered some water from the creek, walked around exploring a bit, made dinner on my camp stove as the sun started going down. By the time it got dark, I was sitting by my fire feeling pretty content with life. This was exactly what I'd needed. I went to bed around 10, which is early for me at home but normal when you're camping. Without streetlights and screens, your body just naturally wants to sleep when it gets dark. I was out pretty quickly. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night needing to pee. I checked my watch and it was just past 2 in the morning. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out of the tent. Did my business a respectful distance away and was about to go back to sleep when I decided to check on my food. I'd hung my cooler from a tree branch about 50 feet from my tent, the way you're supposed to in bear country. When I walked over and shined my light on it, something looked different. The rope seemed looser than I remembered. I pulled the cooler down and opened it. Someone had been in it, not an animal. The cooler was still latched properly, which a raccoon or bear couldn't do. But my sandwich was gone and one of my water bottles. The rest was still there, nothing else missing. I stood there in the dark, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd eaten the sandwich and forgotten. But no, I specifically remembered making it for lunch the next day, and I definitely hadn't drunk that water bottle. The forest was completely silent around me. That should have been my second warning sign. Forests are never actually silent at night. There are always insects, night birds, small animals moving around. But right then, there was nothing, like everything was holding its breath. I turned slowly in a circle with my flashlight, scanning the trees. Nothing, just darkness beyond the small circle of light. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe another camper had come through and helped themselves. Thinking the cooler was abandoned or something. It was annoying, but not dangerous. I rehung the cooler, went back to my tent, and tried to go back to sleep. I couldn't. Every little sound had me alert and listening. The tent fabric moving in the breeze. A branch cracking somewhere off in the distance. My own breathing seemed too loud. Eventually exhaustion won, and I drifted off again. When I woke up at dawn, everything seemed fine. Morning light has a way of making nighttime fears seem silly. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and decided to spend the day hiking some of the trails in the area. I'd pack up and leave the next morning. The hiking was great. Miles of trails through old-growth forest. Barely saw another person all day. I got back to camp around 5, tired and ready to make dinner and relax by the fire. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were in the soft dirt near my tent. Boot prints? Definitely not mine because I'd been wearing my hiking boots all day and these were from a different tread pattern. Someone had walked around my campsite while I was gone. They'd circled the tent, walked over to where I'd hung my cooler, then headed back into the woods going east. My hands started shaking as I looked at those prints. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching my camp. Someone had been here while I was gone. I should have packed up right then. I should have hiked back to my car, even though it was getting dark. But I didn't. I told myself it was probably just another camper who was curious about my setup. Or maybe a ranger checking to make sure I was following leave no trace principles. There were reasonable explanations. So I stayed. I made dinner, but I barely tasted it. I kept looking into the woods, jumping at every sound. I didn't make a fire that night. I wanted to be able to see into the darkness. And a fire would have ruined my night vision. I sat outside my tent with my flashlight off, just watching and listening. Around 9 o'clock, I saw him. Just for a second, maybe 30 yards away through the trees. A shape that didn't belong. A person standing completely still, watching me. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it in that direction. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But I knew what I'd seen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my pack and started throwing things into it. Not even bothering to organize, just stuffing everything in as fast as I could. I was getting out of there, right now. I'd hike by flashlight if I had to. That's when I heard the footsteps. not trying to be quiet anymore, just walking through the leaves and brush, coming from the same direction where I'd seen the figure. Getting closer, I abandoned the pack and dove into my tent. Zipped it shut like that would somehow protect me. I found my pocket knife, the biggest thing I had that could be a weapon. 4-inch blade. Better than nothing. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing. Someone was standing there, just on the other side of the thin nylon, maybe 2 feet away from me. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just sat there with that stupid little knife in my hand, knowing it wouldn't do any good if whoever was out there decided to come in. Time did something weird. It felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. Then the footsteps moved away, slowly, circling around my tent. I tracked the sound as it went around to the back, then to the other side, then silence again. I stayed frozen. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready to react but having no idea what to do. The gunshot made me scream. It was close, maybe 20 feet away. A single shot that echoed through the trees and then faded. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed my flashlight, ripped open the tent, and ran. I don't know if the shot was aimed at me. I don't know if it was a warning or if he missed or what. I just ran through the dark forest, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches whipping at my face, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily. I fell twice. The second time I dropped the flashlight and it went out. I didn't stop to find it. I just kept running in what I thought was the direction of the trail. I have no idea how long I ran. It felt like forever. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but terror kept me moving. Eventually, I found the trail. I recognized a distinctive bent tree I'd passed earlier. I followed the trail back toward my car, jogging now instead of running, constantly looking over my shoulder. I got to my car just as the sun was starting to come up. I'd been running and walking for hours. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove straight to the ranger station and told them everything. The ranger, an older guy named Tom, listened to my story with a serious expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. 6 weeks earlier, another solo camper had been found dead in those same woods, shot once from a distance. They'd ruled it a hunting accident even though it wasn't hunting season. The official story was that someone had been illegally hunting and fired without checking their target. But Tom didn't think it was an accident. He thought someone was out there, stalking campers. He just couldn't prove it. He told me to file a report and said they'd send someone to investigate my campsite. I filled out all the paperwork, giving as much detail as I could remember, then drove home. A week later, I called to follow up and got transferred around to 3 different people before someone finally told me there was no record of my report. They had no incident logged for that date and location. When I mentioned Tom by name, they said no one by that name worked there. I drove back to the ranger station. Different people working, no one knew who I was talking about. The older ranger named Tom didn't exist, according to them. My campsite, when they finally checked it, showed no evidence of anyone else being there. No footprints, no disturbance. My gear was gone, presumably taken by whoever had been stalking me. But there was no proof I'd ever been there. And the dead camper? When I searched for news stories, I found nothing. Not a single article about a body being found in those woods. It's like the whole thing was erased. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times. I know what happened. I know what I saw and heard. That wasn't paranoia or imagination. Someone was out there. Someone watched me, went through my things, and fired a shot in my direction. But I have no proof. No report, no witnesses, nothing. I still camp sometimes, but never alone anymore. And never in the Smokies. I can't go back there. Every time I think about those woods, I remember standing outside my tent in the dark, feeling eyes on me from the trees, knowing something was very wrong, but not understanding how bad it was about to get. I got lucky. That's what I tell myself. That shot could have hit me. I could have been the second dead camper with no news story. No investigation, nothing. Sometimes I wonder if Tom was even real, or if I imagined him in my panicked state. But I remember his face so clearly. The serious way he listened. The fear in his eyes when he told me about the other camper. Someone knows what happened out there. Someone is covering it up, making it disappear. And someone is still out there in those woods, waiting for the next person who decides to camp alone. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd end up hiding in a basement, while strangers tore through a house looking for God knows what. But that's exactly where I found myself last October, crouched in the dark with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. Let me back up a bit. My twin brother Marcus owns this cabin out in West Virginia. It's one of those places that looks great in photos, but is actually kind of a pain to get to. You have to drive about 40 minutes past the last gas station, then another 20 down a dirt road that turns into more of a suggestion than an actual road. The cabin sits on about 15 acres of woods, tucked away where you can't see another building in any direction. Marcus loves it, says it's his escape from the world. I always thought it was just isolated. He called me up in early October asking if I could house sit for 2 weeks while he and his wife took their kids to Disney World. The cabin needed someone there, he said, because they'd had some issues with bears getting into the shed, and the local wildlife management wanted someone present to observe and report. Plus, the propane delivery was scheduled, and someone had to be there to sign for it. I had just finished a freelance project and had nothing lined up for a few weeks, so I figured why not? Get away from the city, do some reading, maybe finally finish that novel I'd been picking at for 3 years. It seemed like perfect timing. The first few days were actually pretty nice. The cabin is small but comfortable, with a wood stove that keeps everything warm and a big window, looking out at the forest. I fell into an easy routine. Wake up, make coffee, sit on the porch for a while, spend the afternoon writing or reading, make dinner, then sit by the fire until I got tired enough to sleep. No phone service meant no distractions. I had to drive into town if I wanted to check my email, which I only did twice that first week. It was peaceful, quiet in a way that city people don't really understand until they experience it. Not silent because the woods are never actually silent, but empty of human noise. Just wind and birds and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere off in the trees. I think that's why it took me so long to realize something was wrong. It was the 8th night. I had made spaghetti for dinner and was cleaning up the kitchen when I heard a car engine. That alone was unusual because the nearest neighbor was miles away, and Marcus had told me he'd already notified them he'd be gone. I wasn't expecting any visitors. I went to the window and looked out, but it was already dark and I couldn't see headlights. The engine sound faded, then stopped completely. I stood there listening for a few minutes, but everything seemed normal again. I convinced myself it had been someone turning around in the driveway, maybe lost or looking for a different property. I went back to washing dishes. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the porch. Not tentative footsteps, like someone unsure if they had the right house. Confident steps, moving quickly. Then voices low and urgent. Multiple people. My stomach dropped. Something about the tone, the way they were moving, told me immediately that this wasn't a friendly visit. This wasn't someone checking if I needed help or looking for directions. I turned off the kitchen light and moved away from the window. My phone was useless out here, no signal. The nearest house with a landline was a 20-minute drive. I was completely alone. The door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Marcus had told me about the panic room when he first bought the place. It was one of those things I had laughed about, calling him paranoid. Who needs a panic room in the middle of nowhere? But apparently the previous owner had been even more paranoid than Marcus. And when he bought the cabin, the room came with it. A reinforced space in the basement with a steel door, basic supplies, and a battery-powered radio. I had seen it once when Marcus gave me the tour. I barely remembered where it was. The front door shook harder. They were really working at it now. I heard power tools, a drill maybe. They were coming in whether I liked it or not. I ran for the basement stairs. The cabin's basement is unfinished. Just concrete and exposed beams and a lot of shadows. I fumbled for the light switch, but then decided against turning it on. If they didn't know I was here, maybe they'd just take what they wanted and leave. I found the panic room by feel, running my hands along the back wall until I hit the steel door. Marcus had shown me the combination. 4 digits. His wedding anniversary. I tried it once, got it wrong, tried again with shaking hands. The lock clicked. I pulled the door open and slipped inside just as I heard the front door upstairs finally give way. Wood splintered. Heavy footsteps pounded across the floor above my head. I closed the panic room door as quietly as I could and spun the interior lock. Then I just stood there in the pitch black, trying to breathe quietly, trying to think. The room was small, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet. I felt around and found a shelf with bottles of water and some kind of food supplies. There was a folding chair, a bucket in the corner that I didn't want to think about, and the radio Marcus had mentioned sitting on a small table. I sat down in the chair and tried to calm down enough to figure out what to do. Above me, the footsteps were everywhere now. Multiple people, moving fast, opening doors, dragging things. I heard furniture scraping across the floor, glass breaking. They were tearing the place apart. It went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 or 40 minutes. I sat in the dark and listened to my brother's cabin, being destroyed by strangers who had no right to be there. I felt angry and helpless and terrified all at once. Then suddenly, there were different sounds, shouts, not the casual communication of people, working together, but urgent yelling, an argument. Something had gone wrong with their plan. A gunshot. I actually jumped, banging my knee against the table. The sound was muffled by the basement and the steel door, but unmistakable. More yelling, footsteps running, doors slamming. Then engine sounds, vehicles starting up and driving away fast, gravel spraying, then nothing. I waited. I didn't know what else to do. I sat in that dark room and waited, listening to the silence, wondering if it was safe or if someone was still up there, waiting for me to come out. I must have waited 2 hours, maybe 3. It felt like forever. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could and pushed it open just a crack. The basement was still dark. I listened hard but heard nothing. I made my way upstairs slowly, stopping at every creak and sound. The cabin was destroyed. Drawers pulled out and emptied. Cushions slashed, cabinets torn open. They had been looking for something specific, I realized. This wasn't random vandalism. They had come here with a purpose. That's when I saw him, a kid, maybe 19 or 20, lying on the floor near the front door in a pool of blood. He was conscious, barely, and when he saw me, he tried to say something. His shirt was soaked red. The gunshot I'd heard had hit him. His friends had left him behind. I won't lie, my first instinct was to just get out of there, to get in my car and drive until I found cell service and call the police. But I couldn't leave him bleeding on the floor, no matter what he'd been doing in that cabin. I grabbed towels from the bathroom and tried to stop the bleeding while I talked to him, told him help was coming, told him to stay awake. He kept fading in and out. At one point he mumbled something about a safe, about how they were supposed to find a safe. It took me 20 minutes to drive to where I could get cell service. I called 911 and told them everything, then drove back to wait with him until they arrived. The police came first, then an ambulance. They took the kid away and started asking me questions. I spent the rest of the night giving statements, explaining over and over what had happened. They told me the kid would probably survive. They also told me they'd been tracking this group for months. Home invasions, targeting vacation properties, looking for cash and valuables. They'd hit 6 houses in the area over the past year. Apparently someone had tipped them off that Marcus's cabin would be empty. They thought they'd have the place to themselves. They arrested 3 more guys over the next week. The kid who got shot gave them up pretty quickly once he realized his friends had left him to die. Marcus cut his vacation short and came back as soon as he heard. He felt terrible, kept apologizing like it was somehow his fault. I told him it wasn't. These things happen. But honestly, I think we were both pretty shaken by how badly it could have gone. I stayed 1 more night at the cabin while Marcus dealt with insurance and repairs. But I didn't sleep much. Every sound had me on edge. Every creak and rustle felt like a threat. I left the next morning and drove home. I haven't been back since. Marcus still has the cabin. He's added better locks, a real security system, cameras. He wants me to visit again, says it's safer now. Maybe it is, but I don't think I'll ever feel the same way about that place. That kind of fear doesn't just disappear because you install a few cameras. Sometimes I still think about that night. About hiding in the dark while strangers ransacked the house above me. About that kid bleeding on the floor, left behind by people he probably thought were his friends. Mostly, though, I think about how differently it could have ended. If I hadn't remembered the panic room, if they'd found me, if that gunshot had been meant for me instead. I got lucky. That's the truth of it. I got very, very lucky. I never thought of myself as reckless. I was careful in most parts of my life. I planned ahead. I double-checked things. I trusted my instincts more than most people I knew. That's why when I tell this story, I don't like how easy it is for people to say, I would never let that happen to me. I used to think that way too. This happened a few years ago in the Appalachian Mountains. I won't say exactly where. Not because I'm trying to be mysterious, but because I don't want anyone turning this into a location hunt. It doesn't matter which trail it was. What matters is that it was remote enough to feel peaceful, but close enough to civilization that I let my guard down. I had just gone through a breakup that left me feeling hollow more than heartbroken. The kind where there's no big fight, no clear villain. Just 2 people quietly deciding to stop choosing each other. I needed space to think, and hiking had always been my way of resetting. I'd done solo hikes before. Nothing extreme, nothing reckless. Overnight trips, marked trails, proper gear. This one was supposed to be easy. One night near a creek, hike back out in the morning. When I pulled into the trailhead parking lot, it was late afternoon. My car was the only one there. That didn't bother me. In fact, I liked it. Silence feels different in the mountains. Heavier, like the land itself is breathing. The sign at the trailhead was old, cracked, and sun-bleached. I remember thinking it had probably been standing there longer than I'd been alive. There was no cell signal, but I already knew that. I told myself I wouldn't need it. That was the first lie I told myself. The hike in was beautiful. Tall trees, thick canopy, patches of sunlight breaking through like spotlights. The trail narrowed the farther I went. Roots crossed the path like veins. The air smelled damp and green, the way forests do when they've been untouched for a long time. About 2 hours in, I heard voices. I stopped walking and listened. 2 men, maybe mid-conversation. Their voices carried farther than I expected. That should have been my cue to announce myself, to make noise to avoid startling anyone. Instead, I waited, unsure why my body had gone still. When I rounded the bend, they were sitting beside a fallen log. Boots off, packs open. They looked normal. That's the part that still bothers me the most. No obvious red flags, no creepy smiles. Just 2 guys who looked like hikers. One of them looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Hey," he said. "Hi," I replied. "You heading through or staying the night?" the other one asked. I don't know why I answered honestly. Maybe because I didn't want to seem rude. Maybe because women are trained to be polite even when something feels off. "Camping near the creek," I said. "Nice spot," first guy said. "We stayed there last year." They watched me the entire time. Not aggressively, just attentively, like they were memorizing something. "You solo?" the second guy asked. "Yeah." That was when I noticed the glance they shared. Quick, almost instinctive. "Be careful out here," the first one said. "Woods get strange at night." I smiled, forced and thin, and walked past them. I didn't look back, but I could feel them watching until the trail curved and swallowed. The sound of their voices. I told myself I was being paranoid. The campsite was perfect. A small clearing by a shallow creek, water moving slow and steady. The sound was soothing, like white noise. I set up my tent, filtered water, cooked dinner. Everything felt normal again. As night fell, the forest changed. It always does. The temperature dropped fast. The shadows thickened. Sounds carried differently. Every rustle felt closer than it should have. I had a small fire going, more for comfort than warmth. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, heart racing. One of the men from earlier stepped into the firelight. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to scare you." I stood up immediately. "We saw your fire," he continued. "Just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay out here alone." I said I was fine. He nodded like he expected that answer. He reached into his pack and pulled out a bottle. "Whiskey," he said. "Helps with the cold." Every instinct I had told me to say no. And I did, at first. He smiled, not offended, just patient. "Just a sip," he said. "We brought extra." I don't remember exactly when I changed my mind. I remember feeling rude. I remember thinking I was overreacting. I remember telling myself that nothing bad ever happens because of one small choice. I took one sip. It burned going down. I handed the bottle back. He thanked me and walked away. His friend was standing farther back, watching. I put out the fire earlier than I planned and went into my tent. I remember feeling unusually tired. Heavy. Like my limbs were filling with sand. I thought it was just the hike. I woke up to voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My thoughts felt slow, tangled. I tried to move and couldn't. Panic surged. But even that felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. The tent zipper moved. Light cut through the darkness. I saw their faces. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. My body wouldn't respond. I could hear them talking about me like I wasn't there, like I was an object they were borrowing. One of them grabbed my arm. That's when everything changed. A voice shouted from outside the tent. "Hey!" Flashlights snapped on. 5 of them. Men moving fast, confident, angry. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The grip on my arm disappeared. Someone pulled the men away from me. Someone else wrapped me in a blanket. I remember crying without sound, my body still refusing to cooperate. They told me later they'd been watching those 2 for hours. Something about them felt wrong. They didn't like the way they followed me. They didn't like the way they waited. They stayed with me until morning, never left me alone. When the sun came up, the forest looked harmless again. That scared me more than the night had. I left the mountains that morning changed in ways I didn't understand yet. I still hike, but I never drink anything offered by a stranger. And I never assume the woods are empty just because they're quiet. I've hiked Old Rag twice before with friends, and both times it was crowded enough that you had to wait your turn at the rock scrambles. This time I wanted to see what it felt like alone on a weekday, before the fall color chasers packed the parking lot and turned the whole thing into a line at the grocery store. Late October seemed perfect. The forecast said patchy fog, light winds, temperatures in the low 40s. Nothing I couldn't handle. I parked at the Berry Hollow trailhead before the sun came up, because the day use permits keep the crowds thinner from that side. And honestly, I just liked the quiet walk-in along the fire road. The lot was mostly empty when I pulled in. 2 spaces over sat a gray Subaru with out-of-state plates and one of those reflective windshield shades tucked up behind the glass. I didn't think much of it. The Appalachian Mountains sit heavy in that part of Virginia. Oak and maple on the slopes, granite slabs that catch the light, switchbacks that make your calves burn, no matter how fit you are. I packed light but smart. Gloves, a hat, a headlamp. a whistle on a cord, and a cheap paper map with the ridge trail and saddle. Trail loop already traced in pencil. I signed the trail register with the time, locked my car, and started up under a dull sky that should have been getting lighter but wasn't. The fog rolled in before I hit the first real climb. It didn't do anything dramatic. It just reduced the world to whatever was directly in front of my boots. My trekking poles clicked against the rock, but even that sounded muffled, like the air had been stuffed with insulation. A few minutes later I heard my name. My full name. Not shouted. More like someone holding a phone out on speaker mode. The tone was flat and thin, and it came from just below the trail on my left. I stopped and called out hello, thinking maybe the Subaru. Driver had caught up and was messing around. Nothing. Then the same voice again. Same distance, same strange quality. "Are you up there?" Different voice this time, but the same words. The same cheap tinny sound. I stepped off the trail a couple of yards and found a little alcove behind a boulder. There it was. A palm-sized Bluetooth speaker wedged under a knit cap, looping 2 lines over and over. "My name and are you up there" in different voices. I turned it off and slid it under a flat stone where I could remember the spot. I marked a small X on my paper map with the time next to it. I didn't love finding that, but it didn't feel like an emergency yet. I switched my phone to airplane mode to save the battery and kept moving, telling myself I'd hand the speaker to a ranger on the way out. The fog got thicker near the first tight rock slots. If you've done old rag, you know, the narrow gaps where you have to pull with your hands and brace, your hips against the stone. I'm not tall, so I go slow and keep 3 points of contact at all times. Somewhere ahead, I heard boot scuffs and the soft rush of breath you get when somebody's right around the corner. The sound stopped when I rounded the turn. The trail was empty. Under a low ledge sat another tiny speaker on a strip of adhesive, playing exactly those scuffs and a quick exhale on a loop. I shut that one off too, and dropped a second X on the map. At that point, my stomach knew what my brain hadn't admitted yet. This was intentional. Not one weird device lost by a teenager. A line of little sound bites planted at blind corners to do something. I didn't understand yet. A 2-note whistle cut across the rocks. It sounded like it came from uphill. Then half a breath later, the same 2 notes to my right. Not a person relocating. 2 sources, same pattern, slightly out of sync. It's exactly the sort of thing you would follow if you were tired and grateful to know other hikers were near. The fog made the blazes hard to spot on the granite, and my head started to want help. Any help. I forced myself to slow down. Look for the blue paint on the rock. Put your hand on the rock. Don't rush. A few minutes later, I found a trail arrow on a post turned 90 degrees. Fresh mud caked around the screws. The arrow pointed to a faint path that sloped out to a flat lip where the brush thinned. The real line, the tiny flecks of blue paint on the stone, continued straight. But you had to look for it. I stepped a yard or 2 down the fake path to check. Past the lip, there was only open air. Not a big dramatic cliff, just a clean drop to broken blocks maybe 15 feet below. If you stepped into that in low light, or panicked at the wrong second, it would be very bad. I backed up and put the flat of my hand on the post. The mud smear had the shape of a palm. That was the first moment I saw the person. Through the fog, a head on the proper trail. A flash of orange cut across a gap between 2 boulders. Shoulder, hood, the back of a head, then gone, not a shadow. A person avoiding being seen. I called out that I could see them, and that I was turning around. No reply. The 2-note whistle came again, farther away this time. Like a tug on a string asking me to keep going. I didn't. I started counting steps between blazes. When I hit a blue paint mark, I said the number out loud and touched the rock, so I couldn't lie to myself about what I was following. On a small flat, I took the pencil and wrote on my map. Arrow turned, drop beyond lip, orange jacket near outcrop. Another device played faint radio chatter at the next bend. It was mixed just enough to sound like park staff using handhelds somewhere ahead. My brain wanted that to be true so badly that my hand went to the volume, before my eyes found the little grill taped in shadow. I turned it off and lodged it in a place I could show later. My shoulders were tight from trying to make the world match what I wanted. That's the worst part about fog. It doesn't lie. It gives you half the truth and lets you do the rest. I chose not to try to pass the person. It wasn't brave. I just didn't like the idea of walking into more blind spots while someone with a plan controlled where the sounds came from. In a waist-deep slit between rocks, I slid down and wedged my back against the cold stone. I stayed still and faced the opening. My breath sounded like fabric moving against fabric. 10 minutes is a long time to sit with your own pulse when you can't see 10 yards. Somewhere above me, footsteps tapped granite. They weren't heavy. The person paused at the mouth of the slot for a second. A sleeve of bright orange came into view and stopped. No words, no movement I could call a shrug or a shift. Just that pause while they listened. I kept my eyes on the ground so I wouldn't give away the glare you get when your pupils are wide. After a couple of long beats, the steps faded north along the ridge. When I climbed out, I didn't continue toward the summit. I reversed to the last blaze I was sure of, checked my map against the terrain, and chose the saddle trail toward Bird's Nest Shelter. I wasn't going to make the loop I had planned. I wanted a wide trail and fewer gymnastics. Going down, I passed two more little speakers. One played a quick hey in a neutral male voice. The other played a single bark, and then a scrape like a trekking pole against rock. I shut both off with the tip of my pole and slipped them under flat stones where they would be easy to retrieve. Bird's Nest Shelter felt like a real place in a morning that had gone thin and unreal. The roof was slick with moisture. The inside smelled like wet wool and wood. There were benches, a signboard, and the junction sign for the fire road. I picked up a fist-sized rock and carried it in my left hand as I left. Not to swing, just to make it clear to whoever was playing with me that I understood this was a person problem, not a trail problem. The fire road gave me width and a line I could trust without reading. Every paint mark. The fog thinned as I lost elevation. The sound of water in the ditches came back. A woodpecker hammered somewhere off to the side and didn't sound like anything else. I didn't hear the two-note whistle again. At the lot, the gray Subaru was gone. There were tire marks on the wet gravel that didn't match mine. I bent to check under my bumper before I unlocked the car. A flat, cheap speaker had been taped to a small magnet and stuck to the frame. It was running a low, nearly inaudible loop, like it had been turned down to make sure it didn't draw attention, unless you were looking for it. I pulled it off, killed the power, and put it with the others in my pack. I didn't wait around to see if anyone else came back. I drove straight out to the Thornton Gap entrance station. The ranger on duty took me seriously as soon as I set the speakers and my map on the counter. I had little X marks and times next to each one. I described the turned arrow, the fresh mud on the screws, and the bright orange jacket. I told him exactly where the fake path dropped off. He radioed maintenance and law enforcement right away. Another ranger photographed the devices and asked if I had moved anything besides turning them off. I gave a straight description and my contact information. It wasn't dramatic. The most useful thing I did all day was write down times. 2 weeks later, I got an email. They had staff out before dawn during similar conditions and contacted a man near Berry Hollow with a day pack full of the same model speakers. A pocket screwdriver, tape, and an orange rain shell rolled up in a side pocket. He ran a small local channel and had been staging. You won't believe what I heard on old rag clips by planting sounds and nudging people toward fake lines. They didn't list everything they charged him with, but creating a hazardous condition and tampering with signs were in the message. The crew reset the arrow and touched up. A marginal blaze near the slab where I had nearly followed that faint line to the lip. I went back the following Saturday with 2 friends because leaving it there in my head felt unfinished. Clear day, blue sky, views open in every direction. We took our time through the slots and I pointed out the places where the sounds had been. Without the fog, it was obvious where the real line went. The slab showed scuffs in a way that made sense. A lot of people were out, and every voice sounded like a voice, not a recording. We got a quick view of Hawksbill through the gap and ate a protein bar on a dry rock. On the drive home, I folded my map along new creases and looked at my notes. The little X marks sat closer to that drop than I wanted to admit. If I had been more tired or less cautious, it would have taken one bad step to make a stupid story into a fatal one. The part that sticks with me is how ordinary the tools were. Cheap electronics, a turned arrow, a jacket bright enough to be seen and still hidden by timing. No ghost, no mystery. Just someone who understood how people move when they think help is just around the bend. I won't solo old rag and fog again. If I hear my name in that flat, tinny way out there, I'll turn around, mark the spot, and report it. This isn't a warning about wilderness creatures or anything supernatural. It's about the gap between what you want to be true and what the blue paint on the rock actually says. In the Appalachian Mountains, you can do almost everything right and still get pulled toward a bad line if you're not paying attention. The fix is boring. Slow down, verify your route, and tell someone who can do something about it. The park fixed the post. The guy is facing charges. I'm fine. That's the whole story. If you ever kayak camp on Fontana Lake in June, listen to what I'm about to tell you. I grew up in western North Carolina. I know the pull and drop of Fontana Dam, the dull green coves, the way the air hangs heavy at night. My cousin and I had a routine for bug season. Paddle after sunset with headlamps off so the gnats didn't swarm our faces. Land on a narrow strip of shore, sleep a few hours, and slide back out before sunrise. We kept it simple. 2 small tents, 2 set inside kayaks, no campfire, no music. This wasn't a stunt. It was just a quiet night in the Appalachian Mountains opposite the Lakeshore Trail, where you can see the dark line of forest and the pale band of old road cuts. When the moon is high, we didn't see anything strung across that cove when we landed. If there had been, our bows would have tapped it. We came in on a 3/4 moon. The water was glassy and the heat held on your skin like a wet shirt. We drifted the last 200 yards with blades resting on the decks and let the hulls slide onto a pocket of gravel. There was room for both boats and 2 tents and not much more. Just a stump at the back edge and a tangle of laurel and rhododendron behind it. We hauled the kayaks above the wet line, pitched quick, ate from bags, and talked in low voices about pushing off at 4:30. The nearest lights were far west toward Fontana Marina. In the distance we heard an outboard idle, settle, idle again. Night fishing, we figured. On the gravel near the stump I noticed a piece of monofilament and a fresh fish scale. I shrugged. Lots of anglers use these pockets. Around midnight I stepped down to the lake to rinse a mug. The cove was a shadow cut into darker shadows. The moon laid a path over the open water and stopped at our pocket like a dull knife edge. That was when I saw it. A narrow, bright cable stretched across the mouth of our cove just above the surface, tight from the stump by our tents to a snag on the opposite bank. It wasn't there when we landed. I know because we guided our bows straight through that opening. In the shallow ripples at the edge I could hear it hum. Not like a sound in the air, but like a faint vibration against water. I followed it with my eyes and my stomach went cold as I counted where my chest would hit if I tried to paddle out under it. I crouched by the stump and found a tarp-covered box tucked into brush. Under it were wire spools, swivels, clips, a bottle of fish scent oil, and a board with measured marks in black marker. Our sandal prints in the damp gravel had been stepped over by wide-soled boots. Whoever set that line came in after we pitched, moved around the very spot where I was kneeling, and worked quiet enough that we never heard them over the tree frogs. Out past the mouth, the outboard we had heard earlier had gone silent. No engine note, no running lights, just the soft dip of something keeping position, then coasting. A narrow beam swept once across the cove from the direction of the main channel. Quick, probing, and gone. Not a headlamp flicker, more like a handheld flashlight used with discipline. I eased back from the water and told my cousin without raising my voice. He looked past me and saw the cable too. We didn't argue about it. We both reached for our multi-tools, planning to cut it quick and slide out before whoever set it could drift back. I touched the cable and felt it bite against the blade before I pressed down. That was when a pebble snapped past my ear and ticked off the rock behind me. It wasn't a blind throw. It was aimed to pass close and warn. I froze with the blade half open. Out at the mouth there was a small metallic ping, followed by a soft scrape. A second line came up from the water, lower than the first, just inches above the surface. Drawn tight and tied off to the opposite bank, in the moonlight it barely showed, but when a small wavelet ran through the gap it flashed and then vanished. Now there were 2 lines across the only clean water exit, one at throat height for a paddler and one low enough to catch a bow and flip a boat. We backed away as slowly as we could, knees loose, keeping our heads below the stump line so we weren't silhouettes. I don't scare easy on that lake, but I know when I'm being handled. The box, the fresh tracks over hours, the timed sweep, the warning pebble. None of it was random. This wasn't a prank, it was a gate. I pictured blasting out at 4:30, with headlamps off like we planned and hitting metal across my chest before I ever saw it. I pictured a flipped boat, a mouthful of hooks on leaders, someone drifting close at idle speed and not saying a word. We didn't debate any longer. We needed another exit. Behind our tents, the ground rose in a short back ridge. I remembered a shallow slough on the paddle in, just a shadow of water tucked behind a point. It wasn't much, but if we could get both boats up and over, we could hand paddle that muddy finger and slip around the point, out of sight from the cove mouth. We stripped weight fast, dry bags to our backs, food bags slung, water bladders clipped. We kept the tent staked to avoid fabric noise. We turned the boat stern first and started the carry, one of us lifting the stern while the other pulled the bow line 10 yards at a time. Every scrape sounded like an alarm, plastic on bark, hull on deadfall. The ridge was only 60 or 80 yards, but it was tight and rutted. We stopped each time we made a bad noise and waited, breathing slow through our noses. Once the same narrow beam swept the pocket we just left. It cut across the stump, blinked out, then was still. Another pebble came in, weak and low, and landed nowhere near us. It wasn't meant to hit. It was meant to let us know a set of hands was still out there and not far. At the crest, we slid the boats down through leaves until mud swallowed our ankles. The slough was shallow enough that the paddles were more trouble than help. We climbed in, lay flat, and moved by hands at the gunnels, pulling along dead limbs and root balls. letting the hulls drift when they wanted to. Once a hook on a loose leader snagged a deck cord, and I felt the pinch through my palm. I flicked it free, kept it in my fingers without closing my fist, and let it fall back where it had come from. The only sounds were quiet water, the breathing we couldn't stop, and something bumping the far side of the point where our original pocket opened. A dull touch, not a crash. We hugged mud and shadow until the slough widened. Then we angled around the point at a line that kept brush between us and the cove mouth. When the main water opened, we crossed to the lakeshore trail side, keeping low, taking short strokes and breaking our cadence whenever we felt exposed. We found a blowdown with a trunk big enough to hide both boats, slid the kayaks under it, flipped them to dull the color, coiled leashes, and scuffed the ground with our heels to break the line of fresh prints. We didn't use bright lights. We clicked our headlamps to the lowest setting, and found the faint path that parallels the water. That becomes the lakeshore trail proper if you follow the blazes and old road cuts. We turned east toward the dam and moved at the kind of pace you use when you need distance but can't risk clatter. If you've never walked that stretch at night, it's honest. Dirt, roots, the occasional old cut where you can feel the grade under your shoes. We counted bends and broken signs. We kept conversation to quick numbers and the names of features we recognized. Nothing extra. Somewhere behind us, the lake stayed quiet. No engine turned over. No voices called out. That was almost worse. We made the road spur near First Light and stepped out onto the access near Fontana Dam while the eastern sky went pale. A man with a pickup was loading rods. He watched us for a second, the mud on our clothes, the way we kept looking behind us, and then said he could take us the short drive to the visitor center. At the Fontana Dam Visitor Center, we told the ranger the whole thing. Where we landed, the first line, the second line, the box, the pebble, the beam, the portage, the stash. He didn't roll his eyes. He picked up a phone. In less than an hour, a boat was launching from near the marina with a park ranger at the bow and 2 officers from the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission beside him. Someone from TVA police would meet them at the cove because it's their water too. We rode with another ranger to an overlook to point out the pocket from above. I kept thinking about that lower line you'd never see until it found your bow. Later that morning, they called us back into the office to go through what they pulled. Under the tarp at our landing, wire spools, clips, swivels, a bottle of anise heavy scent oil, a marked board for measured drops. In the brush, 2 fresh stakes, a bundle of leaders with barbed hooks tied at set intervals. In a shrub thicket, a John boat tucked tight with an electric trolling motor inside. Life jackets in a dry box, no registration stickers on the hull. They bagged every piece. They photographed our pocket. They measured the line height at the mouth and wrote it down. 1 week later, a wildlife officer called. 2 local men were cited for illegal devices and obstruction. The short version? They were rigging lines across a navigable cove to control it at night, while they tended baited gear. The plan was simple. Keep nighttime paddlers from crossing their water by installing a barrier that would stop or flip a boat in the dark. Our timing was the mistake they didn't plan for. We came in early, then saw them finish the gate. They didn't want to fight. They wanted control. A pebble near an ear can say plenty. We got our kayaks back a few days after that. Both hulls had new scars from the carry, and a sticker from evidence that I left on as a reminder. We drove back to the blowdown in daylight with a ranger escort, slid the boats out, and took them home. I added a folding saw to my dry bag that night, and a short coil of cord. I can throw over any suspect line, so I can pull it without standing in front of it. I report every strange rig I see now, even if it's just a loop of cord in the wrong place. I don't assume a quiet cove is safe because no sound is coming out of it. If you read this and think it's just fishing drama, I hope you're right. I also hope you never feel a cable hum under your hand in the dark. This was the scariest night I've had on the water, and nothing about it involved a ghost. It was 2 men, wires stretched at chest height, and the kind of patience that keeps a beam tight and short. If you paddle at night on Fontana or any mountain lake, scan the mouth of every pocket in moonlight, and don't drift blind, where you can't see both banks. The Appalachian Mountains hold a lot of stories. This one ends clean because we backed out and talked to the right people in daylight. Keep your head down, keep your gear simple, and if you sense the shape of a gate across the water, trust it and go around. I've backpacked a lot of the central Appalachian Mountains, and I'm not new to being alone out there. Dolly Sods has always felt like a cheat code for big sky. Open heath, blueberry flats, and scattered pockets of red spruce, where you can tuck a tent out of the wind and still see half the stars in West Virginia. Early September showed 2 nights of clear weather on the forecast, so I planned a simple loop. Park at Bear Rocks off Forest Road 75, take Bear Rocks Trail down to Raven Ridge, cut over toward Dobbin Grade, circle back, I texted a buddy my plan and told him I'd drop a pin from camp each evening. Nothing hero level. I packed light, left after lunch, and told myself I'd go slow and treat it like a star tour. The first afternoon was a postcard. Steady breeze, long views, easy tread. If you haven't been out there, the trails run through knee-high shrubs and grass, with little rock slabs that click under your boots. I passed a couple with trekking umbrellas on their way out, and then didn't see anyone else. I reached Raven Ridge with plenty of daylight, found a spot behind a waist-high clump of spruce, and set my tent maybe 100 feet off the trail so I wouldn't be obvious. I hung my food, filtered a liter from a slow seep, ate, and lay back to watch the sky go purple. When the moon came up, the ground lit enough that I didn't need my headlamp for anything. It was quiet enough to hear distant water, which I took to be Red Creek. I sent my camped at Raven Ridge text while I still had a bar, then put my phone on airplane mode to save juice. I was just dozing when a thin green dot slid along the grass, outside my vestibule like someone tracing a line with a pen. It climbed my tent wall, held for 2 seconds on the fabric, then clicked off. No drift, no pulse, not a lightning bug. I told myself somebody out there was just messing around with a cheap pointer. I waited. Maybe a minute later it came again from a slightly different angle. It skimmed the ground, touched the tip of my trekking pole where it supported the fly, and held there as if someone was trying to gauge distance. I can't explain why, but that part bothered me more than the fact there was a light. It felt like a measurement. I slid my hand up and killed my headlamp, even though it wasn't on. Habit. I unzipped the door a few inches and eased out. On my belly, leaving the zipper mostly shut so the tent kept its shape. The moon gave me all the light I needed. I crawled into the blueberry so slowly I could hear the stems brush my sleeves. 20 breaths. Stop. Listen. The air smelled like dry grass and resin from the spruce. I heard one quiet scuff on the tread where people normally walk. An actual heel sound, not a deer. Then a tiny red glow flared once at knee height across the trail and disappeared. Not high enough to be a cigarette in someone's mouth unless they were crouched. It looked more like a little indicator light cupped in a hand and then covered. The green dot wandered back into view and crept along the ground near my tent like it was outlining the footprint. I waited for a sound that matched it and got a noise I still hear in my head. A soft little chuff of air and a flat whap into the brush inches from my knee. Not a gunshot, no crack, no recoil echo. Having messed with pellet rifles as a kid, the sound made sense. Compressed air and a smack into foliage. I didn't move. Another soft whistle came from the right, answered a moment later from the left. Not bird chatter. It had a human cadence, like someone checking in with someone else. Decision time. I pulled my phone out and with my hand under my jacket to block the glow, fired off a pin drop to my buddy and typed, "Moving away from camp now. If no text by dawn, call it in." Then I put the phone back in airplane mode, slid my pack under the lowest part of the spruce screen, and pulled out a bottle. My map, an emergency bivy, and a windbreaker. I wasn't taking the trail. Whoever was out there knew the tread and the green line was showing up where I would naturally walk. I started moving, diagonally downslope toward the faintest trickle of water I could hear. The idea was simple. Water makes noise and it's easier to hide under spruce than in a heath flat. I kept the moon on my left cheekbone so I didn't drift too far off my line and counted breaths to make sure I wasn't masking anything with my own noise. Every 20 or 30 I stopped, listened, and then moved again. No more pellets, but twice I heard that same low whistle, farther away each time. The green dot didn't follow me into the tight branches. Too much stuff to hit. The drainage strengthened into a narrow run with cold water over fist-sized stones. I followed it downhill by feel and sound until it spilled into a wider channel. Red Creek, or at least one of its branches. The bank on my side was shallow gravel and the water split into multiple ankle-deep flows with slick rocks. I tested with my trekking pole, went slow and crossed without turning on my light. My shoes filled with cold water. I didn't care. Getting distance mattered more. On the far side I found boot prints and a faint corridor that bled into what looked like a feeder section toward Dobbin Grade. If you've been on that stretch, you know parts of it are basically a bog with ruts. In the moonlight you can read the ground, enough to avoid the worst of it, but you're going to sink a little. I kept to the edges where the shrubs thinned, used old planks where they existed, and tried not to leave easy to read tracks in soft spots. I saw no more green dots and heard no more whistles. Either the people behind me didn't want to fight the thickets and the water, or I plain lost them. I won't pretend I wasn't shaking. It came in waves once I realized I'd probably made it out of their little zone. I hit a weathered signpost in the open that told me I was actually on Dobbin Grade. That felt like winning a prize. From there I angled north and east, counting steps and letting the ground tilt tell me I was headed toward the road. The sky on that side got paler enough that the Silhouettes of the spruce were easy to make out. I stepped onto Forest Road 75 around first light, shoulders tight, ready to flag down the first car like a lost hitchhiker. The road was empty, but I had bars again. I called 911 from the shoulder with both hands, visible, and told them exactly what happened. The trails, my camp location, the green dots, the soft pellet hits, the whistles, and the fact that I had left my pack stashed under a low-limbed tree near Raven Ridge. A deputy from Tucker County and a Forest Service law enforcement officer met me at the Bear Rocks lot. Both were calm and professional, which kept me from coming apart. They had me walk them back in during full daylight, staying on the main tread. My tent site looked like nothing happened. The pack was still under the spruce where I'd shoved it, but there were 2 short strips of orange survey tape tied to it. One on the hall loop, one on a shoulder strap with a date and a number written in marker. That made my stomach flip. I hadn't seen those in the night. The officer started scanning around. In a low pocket, maybe 20 yards off the trail, he pointed out an empty pellet tin with oil, residue still strong enough to smell, a cheap night vision monocular with a scuffed housing, and an empty trail camera shell zip tied to a trunk at knee height. The SD card slot was empty. The camera had been set to watch the tread. I don't know if you've ever seen anger roll off a person without them raising their voice, but the officer had that look. He told me without sharing too much that there had been a few reports of packs and food, bags disappearing, when people left camp or fell asleep. Nothing violent, nothing big enough to grab headlines, just a drip of theft that's easy to chalk up to bears or forgetfulness. The orange tape fit a pattern. Mark a pack or a camp in the night, come back at dawn when the hiker is off at water or busy. I gave a full statement at the cars. Times, names of trails, directions traveled, a rough timeline from the first green dot to the moment I stepped onto the road. They photographed my pack with the tape still on it, snipped the tape for evidence after, and handed the pack back. I rode the adrenaline crash all the way home and then stared at the ceiling. That night until 2 in the morning. About a month later, I got an email from the Forest Service officer. He kept it short but clear. They had served warrants on a small group tied to the area, recovered multiple packs and stoves in a garage, and picked up a handful of SD cards that matched empty cases they'd found near popular backcountry corridors. My stove and cook kit came back to me with mud stains that would never wash out. The tent had a couple of tiny burn marks I hadn't noticed in the half-light. I replaced it. The case went to federal officers because it's property crime on federal land. I didn't ask for extra details. I didn't need them. What I changed after that is simple. I keep the essentials on my person even in camp. If I walk to water, my headlamp, map, phone, and a layer are on me, not in the pack. I sleep deeper under spruce instead of on the edge of the flats. I added a little keychain alarm to my kit. If I leave the tent, I tuck a bright bandana under the fly so I can see at a glance if someone's been in there. And I pay attention to weird small stuff, steady lights where they shouldn't be, quiet signals that sound human. The feeling that someone knows where people naturally step at night. I'll still go back to Dolly Sods. It's too beautiful to give up. And most folks out, there are the kind of people who will hand you a water filter if yours fails. But to whoever stood out on Raven Ridge that night and swept a green line along my tent, who marked my pack with orange tags like it had an appointment, who shot pellets into the brush to see if I'd panic, I saw enough of your routine to keep me from ever wanting to talk to you. I hope the knock on your door was loud, your gear was all tagged as evidence, and your little night runs are over. I was born and raised in Alabama, specifically in a small town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains. I always loved living there. The atmosphere was peaceful, the neighbors were friendly, and although strange things happened from time to time, it was never anything serious enough to make me truly dislike this part of the country. To me, it still remains one of the most genuine and unforgettable places a person can grow up. The story I'm about to tell you happened exactly 2 weeks after we moved into a new house during a time when I was completely alone. For everything to make sense, I need to start from the beginning. My grandparents passed away when I was just 13 years old. I remember the day perfectly. My grandmother went out for a walk in the woods, something she did often, and ended up having a heart attack. My grandfather, maybe from grief or for some other reason we never fully understood, died a few months later in exactly the same way. A heart attack in the exact same spot during one of his solitary walks back. Then no one really looked for deeper explanations or connections between the two deaths. First, because we were all still grieving and trying to come to terms with the loss. And second, because they were both over 85 years old, which made it easier to accept as coincidence. After all, at that age anything can happen at any time. And in the woods, all it takes is a little scare or a bit of exertion to be fatal. The truth is, Aside from my older brother who never quite accepted the official version, no one really bothered to find a more logical or concrete explanation for what happened. At the time, we were living in a pretty old house, and that's why we decided to move into my grandparents' place. Me, my mom, and my brother, who was 4 years older than me. My grandparents' house, though pretty secluded, was more spacious and relatively more modern, at least compared to our old place. My mom, who'd been a single parent ever since my dad died when I was still a baby, always had to work hard to support us. Sometimes she held down 2, even 3 jobs at once, which meant she was out of the house most of the time. My brother, being older and already having his own group of friends, was also out a lot, especially at night. That left me just 13 home alone pretty often. Something that no matter how hard I tried to act grown up and independent, always made me feel a little uneasy. The truth is, I liked our old house better. It was closer to town and we had neighbors nearby. At my grandparents' house, the backyard backed straight up to the woods, and that always gave me a weird feeling, like something unseen was watching from the trees. Clearly remember a story from my childhood when my brother had to see the school psychologist because for weeks he kept insisting there were creatures living in the forest. They said he had some kind of anxiety disorder, and eventually he stopped talking about it. Maybe because someone taught him to shut up, or maybe because he realized nobody believed him. But that story never left my mind, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it was always there, like a shadow in my memory, quietly feeding my anxiety. Back to the night when it all happened. It had been a few weeks since our grandfather had passed, and only 2 weeks since we moved in. I was completely alone. My mom was working a night shift at a bar, and my brother had gone out to a party with some friends. Just so you can picture the house, it has 3 floors, and it's built on a small hill. That means the basement is level with the ground. At the back of the house, but buried into the hill at the front. If you come in from the backyard through the woods, you enter directly into the basement and have to go up 2 floors to reach my bedroom. If you come in from the front, you enter straight into the living room and kitchen, and then only have to go up 1 flight of stairs to get to the 2nd floor where I slept. I was lying in bed reading. It was past 11 at night when I clearly heard the sound of a window opening. I froze instantly. I knew that house well, and I was absolutely certain that if it was a window, it could only be the one in the basement. It was the only sliding window in the house. All the others were old-fashioned ones that opened inward. The basement window had been replaced recently and was different, and I knew for a fact I had locked it. It couldn't be opened from the outside. If it were my mom or my brother, they'd have to come through the door, not the window. I stayed completely still in bed, straining to hear anything else. The silence was total, but my heartbeat was so loud it felt like it was echoing through the entire room. I was just 13, and even though I wanted to be brave, I was alone in a house that still didn't feel like mine. In the middle of a dense, dark forest. I was scared, really scared. Minutes passed. I don't know how many, and the silence remained. No sounds. I started convincing myself I had imagined it all. I went back to my book, or at least I tried, but I couldn't focus. No matter how many times I read and reread the same page, nothing was sticking. I didn't have a TV or computer in my room at the time, so I just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard my brother's voice calling me. I jumped, but at the same time I felt a wave of relief. Maybe it had been him who made the window noise and I just hadn't heard the door open. I answered him but got no reply. I called again. Still nothing. I got out of bed and walked to the door. I heard my brother's voice again calling me, and so I started going down the stairs, following that familiar sound. Halfway down to the basement, I saw the sliding window wide open, and in that instant I knew for sure something was wrong. At that exact moment, I felt something move behind me. I turned around and up on the top floor I saw a shadow pass by. I didn't think twice. I bolted through the basement, out the open window, and sprinted across the backyard in a panicked, irrational run until I crashed into my brother and 2 of his friends, who were just coming in from the woods. He was shocked to see me like that and immediately asked what was wrong. I was gasping for air, trying to explain, but the words weren't coming out right. I kept pointing back at the house, trying to tell him someone was inside. Someone had been calling his name. Someone had opened the basement window. My brother looked at his friends and then back at me. He could see I wasn't messing around. He could see the genuine terror on my face. One of his friends pulled out his phone and called the police, while my brother grabbed a flashlight from his car and started walking toward the house. I begged him not to go inside, but he told me to stay with his friends and wait. He went in through the basement window, the same one I'd just escaped from. I stood there in the cold night air, shaking, watching the beam of his flashlight move through the rooms. It felt like forever, but it was probably only 5 minutes before he came back out. He said the house was empty. No one was there, But then he told me something that made my blood run cold. The front door was unlocked. Wide open, actually. And he knew for certain he'd locked it before leaving. The police arrived shortly after. They searched the entire house, top to bottom. They found the basement window open, just like I'd said. They found the front door unlocked, but they didn't find anyone inside. No signs of forced entry, except for the window which, according to them, could have been opened from the inside if someone knew how to manipulate the lock. They asked me questions. What did the voice sound like? Was I sure it was my brother's voice? Did I see anyone? Did I hear footsteps? I answered as best I could, but honestly, I was still in shock. The voice had sounded exactly like my brother. That's why I'd followed it. That's why I'd gone downstairs in the first place. One of the officers, an older man with kind eyes, sat down with me on the porch and told me something I'll never forget. He said that in these mountains, especially in the old forests around here, there are things that have learned to mimic human voices. He said it in a way that made it clear he wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to warn me. He told me that over the years there had been reports from people living near the woods. People who heard family members calling them from the trees. People who followed those voices and got lost. Some of them were never found. Others came back different, unable to explain what happened or where they'd been. He said the old-timers in the area have a rule. If you hear someone calling you from the woods, especially at night, you don't answer. You don't follow. You stay inside and you lock your doors. Because whatever is calling you, it's not who you think it is. My brother didn't believe any of it. He thought the officer was just trying to explain away what was probably just some drifter or a burglar who'd gotten spooked and run off. But I believed it, because I know what I heard, and I know that voice led me down those stairs, toward that open window, toward the woods. If my brother hadn't come home exactly when he did, if I hadn't turned around and seen that shadow on the top floor, I would have kept following that voice. I would have gone out that window, and I don't think I would have come back. After that night, my mom made sure someone was always home with me. My brother started taking his responsibilities more seriously. And we never talked about what the officer said, but I know it stayed with both of them just like it stayed with me. A few months later, we moved again. My mom said the house was too big, too expensive to maintain, but I think the real reason was that none of us felt safe there anymore. Not after that night. I'm older now, living on my own, far from those mountains. But every now and then, usually late at night when I'm alone, I think about that voice. I think about how perfectly it mimicked my brother, how it knew exactly what to say to get me to follow. And I think about my grandparents, both of them dying in the same spot in those woods, both of them going out for walks alone, both of them having heart attacks with no witnesses, no explanations. I wonder if they heard voices too. I wonder if something called to them, using a voice they trusted, and led them deep into the forest. Deep enough that by the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late to turn back. My brother still doesn't talk about it. But a few years ago during a family dinner, he mentioned something in passing that made me look up from my plate. He said he'd been reading about the Appalachian Mountains, about the old legends and folklore. He said there were stories going back, hundreds of years, about things in the woods that hunt by mimicking voices. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I knew he was thinking about that night. The night I almost followed a voice that wasn't his. The night something tried to lure me into the forest. The Appalachian Mountains are beautiful. They're full of life and history and mystery. But they're also full of things we don't understand. Things that have been there long before. We arrived and will be there long after we're gone. And some of those things have learned that the easiest way to catch a human is to sound like someone they love, someone they trust, someone they would follow anywhere, even into the dark woods where no one can hear you scream. I still go back to Alabama sometimes to visit family, but I never go near those woods. And if I ever hear someone calling my name from the trees, I won't answer. I won't even look. Because I know now that some voices should never be followed, and some invitations should never be accepted. The mountains remember everything, and they're always listening. This happened 15 years ago when I was still living with my parents and siblings in the Appalachian Mountains of Georgia. No matter how much time passes, that night remains burned into my memory in a way that still affects me to this day, especially when I'm home alone at night. I was born and raised in a remote area of those mountains. To be completely honest, I never really liked living there. Maybe it was the constant weirdness in the air, whether it was strange sounds coming from the woods, or people who sometimes just seemed completely out of their minds. And anyone who lives or has ever lived in that region knows some days feel like a full-blown circus act. My sister was a true dance prodigy, and from a very young age, schools had already started expressing interest in having her join their programs. That particular weekend, my parents had planned a short trip to visit one of those schools. They left right after lunch on Friday. and planned to be back on Sunday as soon as they could. My younger brother, who was only 8 at the time, naturally went with them. I didn't go, not because I couldn't, but because honestly, the idea of staying home alone was way too tempting. To give you an idea of where we lived, it was an area where homes were more like actual farms, huge properties with land that stretched out for kilometers into the forest. That meant we lived in almost complete isolation. On my mother's side especially, our family had a long and deeply rooted relationship with guns. So from a young age, I was used to seeing them around the house. And more importantly, I knew exactly how to use them. Before leaving, my dad repeated, probably for the 100th time, the 3 golden rules he lived by. Don't react to noises coming from the forest. Don't open the door to anyone. And never under any circumstances go outside after dark. Simple rules, but taken very seriously by people who live out there. I told him I was just going to spend the night, quietly playing video games, and would go to bed early, which to be fair was my plan. As soon as they left, I followed everything my dad had ever taught me to the letter. I locked all the windows, doors, and any other potential entry points into the house. I saved the living room window for last, a massive window that took up almost an entire wall and was a centerpiece of our home. During the day, it filled the living room with sunlight. At night, we usually closed it except on full moon nights, when we left the blinds open until the last person went to bed just to enjoy the view. That night was a new moon, and even though it was dark, there was this strange sort of glow outside that made the forest in the distance look both fascinating and terrifying at the same time. It was a beautiful kind of fear, if that makes any sense, like a controlled kind of dread that I'll admit I sort of enjoyed. I locked all the windows, but since I was planning to hang out in the living room playing games, I left that big one open. I heated up the pizza that my parents had left me, plopped down on the couch and played for hours. Eventually, exhausted and half asleep, I turned off the PlayStation, stayed there on the couch for a few seconds, and of course I ended up dozing off. I woke up around 4 in the morning with that unbearable feeling that someone was watching me. That's when I realized I'd forgotten to close the blinds. Still groggy, I got up to close them and saw something that froze me to the core. A handprint on the glass. It looked like someone had pressed their hand against it to peek inside. The moonlight was just enough for me to clearly see the shape of the palm and fingers. I stood there paralyzed for a few seconds and then tried to convince myself it could have been a print left by one of my parents from a few days earlier. I closed the blinds, went to my room, and more out of instinct than actual belief, locked the door behind me. Saturday started off completely normal with nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't have any real plans, so I invited a friend from school over to hang out for the afternoon. He showed up around 2 and stayed playing games with me well past dinner. When I walked him to the door, I noticed something that made me stop for a second. A pair of footprints in the damp ground outside. It hadn't rained in the morning, but around 4 in the afternoon there had been a light drizzle, which meant those prints had to have been made after he arrived. And neither of us had stepped outside that whole time. That handprint on the glass came rushing back into my mind. Had someone been creeping around the house? I didn't want to show any sign of fear in front of my friend, so I didn't say a word. But the moment he left, I checked and double-checked every door and window, then grabbed one of the guns we kept in the house. Because no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, it no longer felt like a coincidence. Someone had been out there the night before, watching me while I slept on the couch. I thought about calling my parents, but I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle it, or worse, give them a reason to never let me stay home alone again. So I didn't. I tried calming myself with the thought that even if someone had been out there, they were still outside, and that idea gave me a few minutes of comfort. That is, until I started heading up the stairs to my room and noticed a motionless shadow at the top, right in the corner where I used to hide to jump scare my siblings. That's when I knew without a shred of doubt. I wasn't alone in the house. I gripped the gun tightly, instantly feeling the real weight of what it would mean to pull the trigger on another human being. Without thinking twice, I bolted for the kitchen door that led to the garage, slammed it shut behind me, and bought myself a few precious seconds. I managed to unlock the garage door, jump into my dad's old car, the one he sometimes let me drive, and just as I jammed the key into the ignition, I heard frantic footsteps coming down the stairs, followed by violent bangs on the door. Someone was trying to break it down. I floored it, and in the rearview mirror I saw him clear as day, a man dressed all in black stepping through the now broken door. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest, and it's honestly a miracle I didn't cause 2 separate accidents that night from how badly my hands were shaking. I drove straight to my friend's house because I had no idea where else to go, and only when I got there did I finally feel like I could breathe again. His dad called the cops and then got in touch with my parents. The police came, looked everything over, but aside from the kitchen door that had been busted open, nothing was broken or out of place. The only thing that confirmed someone had actually been inside was the piece of paper left on my bed. Handwritten on it were the words, "Next time you won't be so lucky." I ended up living in that house for another 6 years, but I never spent another night there alone. Not me, not anyone. My parents upgraded all the security, and we never had another incident after that. Still, all these years later, thousands of miles away, I get chills every time shadows stretch across the walls of my house. Like for just a moment, I'm 16 again, staring up at the top of the stairs, frozen in place. Absolutely sure someone was watching me from the dark. The Appalachian Mountains hold more than just natural beauty. They hold people who know how to stay hidden, who know how to wait, and who understand that isolation is their greatest weapon. I live in New York City now, but I grew up and spent my entire childhood in West Virginia. Up until the night this story takes place, I loved living there. But after what happened, I could never think of that place as home again. It's been 23 years now, and I can finally look back on that night with a bit of emotional distance. The hardest moments are when I go visit my parents and step back into that house, that room, and relive that night all over again. I had just turned 13 the week before, and in all my preteen arrogance, I was starting to act out a little, fully convinced I was already old enough to make my own decisions. Our house was in a neighborhood with a few other houses nearby, but right in our backyard was the edge of one of the largest forests in the region. My parents were always really strict about never leaving me home alone. We lived in a place that was relatively quiet, sure, but it wasn't unusual to hear about small break-ins now and then. And the year before in the neighboring town, a kid had completely vanished. He was only 7, taken from inside his own home while his parents and grandparents were there. It had been a huge scandal around here, and it only made my parents, and honestly most of the parents in the area, even more cautious. That particular night we'd had a fight in the afternoon. I can't even remember what started it, but I remember exactly how it ended. Shouting and my firm decision that I was not going to my mom's work party. I was dead set on it. I remember yelling to the point where my mom, who rarely lost her temper, got really mad. It might have been one of the worst arguments we ever had. They were genuinely hurt, and I remember them walking out and slamming the door behind them without saying a word. They'd planned to be back right after dinner. I, on the other hand, was proud of myself. I finally had the whole house to myself and could do whatever I wanted, at least until they got back. I know I was being totally stubborn, one of those arrogant kids who thinks they know everything. But to be fair, that phase came and went pretty quickly. I mean, most of us go through it at some point, some more than others, but it's pretty much a universal experience. Since I didn't have a TV in my room, I stayed in the living room. It must have been around 8:30 when the storm started. Heavy rain, pounding wind. I could hear the trees whipping around out back, and I had to turn the TV up just to hear anything. At about 9:10, the landline rang. It was my parents calling to say there had been a landslide on the main road into town, and traffic was completely blocked. That's when I realized how serious the storm actually was. My mom was speaking louder than usual, maybe because of the rain hammering down on the car. I told them not to worry, that everything was fine. I was still trying to play the part of the angry kid, but my mom's voice, sad and anxious, just erased any leftover anger I had. So I told her I was okay and asked her not to worry. She gave me a list of things to do. Double-check that all the windows and doors were shut tight. Unplug a few appliances just in case the storm caused a power surge. Supposedly my dad had already locked everything before they left, but they wanted me to check anyway. You could hear the storm from downstairs. But once I started going up the stairs, I realized the second floor was way colder and the sound of the rain and wind was way louder. At first, I thought it was just the master bedroom, which faced the woods and always sounded louder when it rained. But when I got to the top of the stairs, I noticed the bathroom window was wide open. I didn't think much of it. Assumed the wind had blown it open. I went over, shut it, and headed back downstairs to wait for my parents. But time kept passing and nothing happened. Then around 9:45, the phone rang again. My parents wanted to check in, said the police were trying to clear the road, and with a little luck they'd be home in an hour. I was about to hang up when I heard the upstairs floor creak. The house wasn't new, and we'd had moisture issues for a while, so certain spots, especially near my room, always creaked when someone stepped on them. I hung up and froze, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. It was a faint sound, barely noticeable, but it was there. The floor was creaking. And then as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I told myself it was probably just the wind or a pressure shift or something. There couldn't be anyone inside. If there were, I'd be hearing more than just faint creaks. I sat back down in the living room, but I was getting more and more anxious. All I wanted was for my parents to get home. There's something I haven't mentioned. I'm diabetic, and I have to check my blood sugar regularly. I've known how to recognize the warning signs since I was a kid. If my levels get too high, I need insulin right away, or I could go into shock. All my medical supplies were on my nightstand, and even though it was the last thing I felt like doing, I knew I had to go upstairs. I started climbing the stairs, and as I got near the top, my whole body tensed up. Parts of the hallway floor were wet, like someone had come inside with soaked shoes and left a trail. That's when it all clicked. The open window, the noises upstairs, and now this. But when I first came up to close the window, there hadn't been any water on the floor, which meant that if someone had come in through there, they were already inside the bathroom at the same time I was, probably hiding in the bathtub while I was standing just a few feet away closing the damn window. That realization terrified me in a way I still can't fully explain. It felt like I almost had a heart attack right there. My room was the first door in the hallway. Then at the far end was the bathroom, and next to it my parents' room, right where the floor was wet. Very slowly I stepped into my room and closed the door behind me. My parents had a strict rule, no locking bedroom doors, so they'd taken the key out. In that moment, I would have given anything to know where they kept it. I ran to my nightstand, grabbed my glucose meter, and checked how much insulin I needed. That's when I heard the floor creak again. I grabbed everything and hid inside my closet. Now here's the thing about that closet. When my parents bought the house, my room was originally 2 separate rooms. They turned them into one, but there was a part of the wall they couldn't completely remove, so they built a closet around it. To make the most of the space, they added a hidden crawl space in the back that no one knew about. It was my favorite hiding spot when I played with my cousins. I kept hearing the creaking, clearer now, like the footsteps were coming from my mom's office in the next room. It gave me just enough time to inject the insulin. Then I heard my bedroom door open. Someone had actually come in. By that point, I was already inside the crawl space, and the door was shut behind me. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. They walked through the room, circled the bed, peeked behind the curtains. They were definitely looking for me. Then I heard footsteps coming toward the closet. I heard the door open, felt the clothes being pushed to one side. I was sure they'd find me, but after a long silence, the footsteps moved away and I heard them sit down on my bed. I had both hands over my mouth, trying not to make a single sound. And then over the sound of the rain, I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway. The person got up, walked to the window, opened it. A few seconds later, I heard the front door open. My mom started calling my name. That's when I lost it. I broke down completely, crying like I'd never cried before. Like all the fear I'd bottled up suddenly tore its way out. I heard my parents calling louder, maybe already sensing something was wrong. But I couldn't answer, let alone move. I had no idea if that person was still in the house. What I remember after that comes in flashes. I remember my parents carrying me out of that crawl space, almost dragging me out. I remember trying to explain through pure panic what had happened. The police arriving. A really kind woman asking me questions I couldn't answer. I never saw the person's face. I didn't even know if it was a man or a woman. After everything that happened, I was never left alone again. The following week, my parents installed an alarm system. Later, we were told that a man had been arrested for breaking into another house and stealing valuables. They said it was probably him, but I knew it wasn't. The person who came into our house had the chance to steal something and didn't take anything. Nothing ever happened again, and over time I calmed down. But that night shattered my sense of safety in that house. I moved on and I rarely think about it except on the nights. I go back to sleep in that room and become that terrified 13-year-old kid all over again. Living in the Appalachian Mountains means accepting that you're never truly alone. The woods are always watching, and sometimes what comes out of them doesn't want your belongings. It wants something far more sinister.